And we are live. This is episode 2 of the Shamus Young Memories podcast. I'm here, Paul Spooner, with Ross and Chris this episode.
Hello.
Say hello, guys.
What's up?
Hello.
So, this is the second episode, so the format's not nailed down. Generally, we do an introduction. I've already introduced myself in a previous episode, but I'm Paul Spooner. I was the co-host with Shamus from 2019 until he passed away this past summer. And I'm joined by two fellows who also worked with Shamus in the past. Ross, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Ross. I worked with Shamus and Arvind on Good Robot and a bunch of similar indie games at the time with Arvind's side. And I generally followed Shamus's site. I'm trying to think back to when it was, but it's been quite a while. Might have been 2006.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've just always been a fan of like the content, and I just kind of found it, I think, too.
It was, a lot of
games
people found him
back.
from the DM of the Rings. Was that something that was on the board for you or something else?
I think it was from The Escapist, and if I'm trying to remember, like what initially got me like reading was actually like an article. It was it was funny. It was a rant about his terrible keyboard, and I was like, "This is exactly how I feel." Like, I can relate to this so much that I hope there are other rants in here, and I found a couple good ones. And then we got onto the game analysis, which is of course also a thing I'm super interested in. So I was
Right.
kind of hooked from there.
Right. Excellent. And how about you, Chris? How did you get connected with Shamus and his site?
Oh my goodness. I was actually. It's funny because I was in college when a friend linked me DM of the Rings, and I don't remember how far along it was. I think I was reading it before the party split up into the Two Towers, so it was decently early on. I found the comic, and then I started reading through the blog, and you know, as time went on, I don't even remember what his blog was like because you read some of his older stuff, like if you go back, it's so much shorter.
Yeah.
Like he'll talk about something in like so briefly and in less detail. And it's like, man, is this the same guy, really? Um,
You remember
but
when
no,
Seamus
like,
did like anime reviews?
oh
There were a
yes,
couple
I
of those on
do.
there too, and I was like, oh my god, he also watches anime? That's great.
Yeah.
It was nice. Yeah. So I remember a whole bunch. Well, I vaguely remember a lot of that because it was at this point like over a decade now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forget the first time I worked with. I know I met him at PAX East. The
Okay.
one year he went, and I know
Yeah.
it's funny because I was excited to meet him, but I ended up spending more time talking with Josh from Spoiler Warning, who was also there
Right.
with him.
Yeah.
That was when he also had copies of the Witch Watch. I believe I bought a physical copy there
Ah.
from him.
That sounds cool.
And no, it was very pleasant meeting him and meeting Heather and Josh, but it was always like one of these things where, you know, I always, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I do forget the first time I had him on a podcast, but it's a shame because like end of 2021 and then into 2022 started to have him, on my podcast more. We did a couple of those streams and it was just, good getting to work with him. We had plans and then
Yeah.
untimely, but I'm glad I got to have that, but I guess we'll get into a little more of that later.
Sure. Sure. So yeah, I also was very honored to be able to work with him. And I think it was one of those things where honestly, I wouldn't have really cared who he was if he didn't have some kind of reach. Like part of the attraction of Shamus was that he seemed like someone who was famous enough to be interesting to talk to because it would boost your signal, while also being someone who is approachable enough to talk to because he actually cared about
We'll
people.
talk to you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there was a period where I didn't really comment on much of anything because I've always been a console gamer, And for a straight run, there was a lot of games and other. I think it was more. I was drifting away from programming. Like, I realized I'm not a programmer. I can't do it. So he was getting like really deep into the procedural stuff, I think, and I stopped commenting so often. But then when I came back, it's like it was surprising to know he remembered who I was. And the second that I met him, actually, I was like, "Yeah, I'm this on your comments," and he knew immediately.
Yeah.
So
He really
that
did
was always
read every
impressive.
single comment, and just about as soon as it came in, it was really
I
something to see.
remember there was a point in the Mass Effect retrospective where he like referenced a comment that I made talking about the ammo system being weird, and I was like, "Oh my god, he remembered my comment from like a year ago."
Yeah,
It was
I
just
still
like a rant.
I still carry in me like this little bit of pride that I forget what my comment was, but I was like, call it an autobiography or something. And he was like, I like that. It's an autobiography now. So I'm like,
Oh my
oh,
god.
yeah, yeah. He really did. He really did pay attention to the comments, and I think that's the thing that really set him apart as an internet personality. Is like he really was paying attention to what people thought, and not just like what they said, but what they were trying to get at.
I mean, it would
Yeah, and
impact his. Sorry,
oh no worries.
just it would impact like some of his later posts. Like he'd go later down the line and be like, oh, okay, so like here's something I was going to discuss, but it's already been discussed thoroughly in the comments. So here's some of the feedback. Like he'd throw stuff like that in there, in and out.
Yeah, also like again, probably the world's sanest comment section on an internet presence in 2023 or 2022.
By
Yeah.
2020, yeah. There were a couple places I knew that were equally sane, but then certain things happened, and the sanity went away,
Hmm.
and that shape. And the thing is, again, like Seamus was a minimal rules guy. That was one of the things I always found impressive. He basically, and he discussed it thoroughly as well. It's like the more rules you have, the more wiggle room you actually give trolls to use, because they start to dance the line. So
Yeah.
if instead you keep it
Yeah,
vague, it actually helps encourage. And I think it's just also just the kind of community there. Like because he was in-depth analysis, he drew a sort of personality that, you know,
yeah, and it was kind of also the last bastion of like text-based discussion too. In a
oh,
world
yeah,
of YouTube videos that go 3 hours long, which don't get me wrong, are super entertaining sometimes and very insightful, but like you don't get the Seamus length like Mass Effect deconstruction anywhere else.
Hmm.
someone constructing their first hour-long YouTube video, and oh my goodness, I'm crazy for doing it. Um, no, I actually do understand that too because I like having blogs to read. I like having, and even if you go on someplace like Reddit,
Mhm.
the amount of like any modern forum or someplace like Reddit, it's like people have been programmed by social media so much that they can't post a comment that's more than 140 characters.
Yeah,
And if they do, it's very rare, and it feels sometimes it's rare that it gets read. Like there are some corners, but there's nothing quite like, especially because again, like the medium of Reddit is stuff's moving so fast that you leave a comment and then there's no discussion after. So even if you have this
right.
big comment, very rarely does it become a discussion, a discourse.
Hmm. Yeah. No one's reading the comments either. That was one of the again. That's one of the amazing things about Seamus's blog is that like you could put a giant old comment out there, and not only would Seamus read it, but there were like two or three other people who would read that thing and maybe even respond back to you. So it was like it really was a community that Seamus built through his moderating style, as you were saying, and through I think his personality too. Like he wasn't someone who got bent out of shape over things that he couldn't see a solution to. I think like every
Yeah,
time he got bent out of shape about something, he was like, "Look, I'm upset about this because here's this solution that I'm pretty sure would work." And like why don't we just do this solution? Whereas a lot of times people get upset about like, oh, why can't we fix this problem? It's like, well, that's a very complicated problem and it's very difficult to solve. And what's your solution going to be, right? I think that's
right,
part of what
right.
Seamus's policy about no religion, no politics was. Is like, you know, not only was he unable to see a way to moderate those fairly, but he also didn't have simple answers for how to do those things. And so it's just like, hey, this is going to be fruitless, right? We're going to stick to the things where we can actually solve things. And
Yeah,
yeah.
not just trying to, you know, solve the entire world's problems in like one tweet.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd be so simple if we just did this one thing.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just never one
actually,
thing.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the favorite things that we remember from Shamus's work. Not necessarily the thing that got you interested in or the thing that got you hooked, but like favorite thing that he made over the years, maybe something he wrote or a video he made.
oh my goodness.
Oh, there's so much.
I know, right? Well, I mean, we've got time.
Is high up there.
Let's go into
is
it.
high up there for sure.
Mm.
It was cool to see him actually write a book, and kind of even like not just write a book, but debug a book. Because when he was done writing it, he then had a bunch of opinions on what he'd done right and wrong, and how he'd do stuff different in the future. And I was like, oh my god, we're getting like a programmer retrospective on writing.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
On his own work too.
On his own work, yeah.
Yeah, that was really fun. I had
Yeah, that's a really tough one. Especially because he did so many different things. I mean, you note that he did a book, he did his retrospectives, he did his comics, and it's like, oh my goodness, you're asking me to choose?
yeah, he did videos.
I kind of also liked the video game, like if I was an evil CEO perspective on a couple articles.
Yeah, yeah. How would
That's
I
like
run this company if I was just trying to make a ton
Right.
of money? And he's like, look, this can't be the motivation because here's the kind of things that you would do if you're just trying to make a ton of money.
Yeah, that's my biggest regret. I really wanted to have a conversation about that, like because at the time I last talked to him about it, I was like just getting into the games industry, and now I've been there for 5 years, and I actually have a perspective that's worth sharing.
Hmm.
You know, on the evil CEO front, and also on the like why games end up the way they do, and why the writing is always dumb and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, let's
See,
let's come back to that as we progress through the episode here. Maybe we can have a
Okay.
short segment.
Sounds good.
So, what do you think, Chris? Have you settled on anything?
Well, I decided to break it up into different kinds of things, right?
All right.
So if it's like raw entertainment value, it would probably be actually Chainmail Bikini because it was him exploring, being able to write with more freedom than just screenshots.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that did, as you know, and he was very open about it too. It presented difficulties between him and I remember the website Sean Shinari, but I do not remember his full name. Shoot, the artist that he collaborated with.
Yeah.
But
Let me
yeah,
look it up.
it did put stress on the artist, so they tried to work around that though, and that was, I think, very good of them. But it's like even reading like his plans for Chainmail Bikini, like when they couldn't finish it, they were like, okay, here's what we had in mind. And reading through it, it's like you can see it playing out, and it's like, this is so genius. This is so entertaining. Like they wrap everything up. Like there's so many, like he made it look intuitive to him is what he did. And it's, if we were to talk to him, he'd probably sit there and talk about like all the bad ideas he had to scratch out, all these other things that he had to work through. But it's an aspect of like creative writing that I know in my amateur efforts, I just in outlines I've never been able to really piece together well on my own. So I know it's like that was a talent. So Chainmail Bikini, when it comes to entertainment value, I probably like more than Stolen Pixels or even DM of the Rings. But DM of the Rings is definitely more complete. And
Sean
Stolen
Gatson,
Pixels is
by the way. Sean Gatson was the
Yes.
artist. I put a link to his Instagram in the chat.
okay. But no, that stuff was just great on pure entertainment value. So it's like he could have just done the comics really, and probably done well enough. But he liked to write, and honestly, that's where I connected with him most. So I guess for me personally, I'd have to point to things like the Batman Arkham series and the Spider-Man series that he did. because I love his Mass Effect series, but me being more of a console gamer, those games like Spider-Man and Batman are more my kind of gameplay speed. So seeing his reaction to them and seeing how he perceived them was and reading his Final Fantasy X series, going back and reading through that because it's like these are games that are like my wheelhouse, my foundation growing up. Mass Effect is always more Western RPG, so he always had more insight than I did coming in. But then he had a different perspective on those shared games that allowed me to reconsider some of my perspective. And like even going through games now, I think about, especially with Batman, Shamus's whole perfectible combat concept. And I'll play games, and again, like the game I'm making a video on, Darksiders, right now, because of small little things, I can't help but hear that in my mind, like him talking about perfectible combat and thinking, because of the inconsistency of these little things here, it prevents this game from being perfectible in that manner. And I don't discuss that in my video. It's because it's something that's his, right? It would feel weird to like bring that up when it's also not necessarily wholly my perspective. But having him there to have, because I think that's like the reason I really connected with him, and a lot of like why I was really inspired, why I was really connected, because so rarely in my day to day, be it in when I was in college, now that I'm an adult, and I'm talking with my friends and everything, did I meet someone that perceived and looked at and analyzed games in a similar fashion that I do. And again, like unlike everyone that that's on YouTube that I watch that's similar, Shamus was accessible. He was someone that you could talk to, you can comment, and he might respond if he has the time. So it was different. So I think in those regards, like those kinds of retrospectives were the ones that I probably favored because they were the closest to a conversation until, I was able to have them on my podcast or my Twitch and we could have a conversation.
A real conversation, right?
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times those were also conversations with the community too, like you would end up having a discussion with some of the other commentators. And that was pretty cool too.
In a lot of ways, that's how I found a lot of the other community members. You start to find, this guy, and this guy, or gal. Like, I don't know. It's like this person,
Mostly
this person,
male.
all had. Yeah, but you don't want to assume.
Yeah.
They all had, they got similar tastes as me in games. Kind of a thing. So you start to pick and notice. And that's one of the things too. You start to notice the broad, diverse tastes of the people that are reading his blog. And that was especially in his, what I've been playing posts, because everyone else would share what they've been playing and you'd get some interesting discussions out of that too.
Yeah, some of the what everyone's been playing posts were really, really cool. I found a lot of games out of those.
I should mention I actually got my first like decent job working for Arvind off of Twentysided, because Rutskarn was like, we need a scripter to work on this game that I've been working on for a while, and I already knew what it was thanks to like Shamus's blog post on it. And then he was like, yeah, so does anyone know any scripting? And I was like, I did some batch scripts to compile my levels in Source, and then they're like, you're hired.
Nice.
So
Nice.
I got super lucked out because Arvin was also like a Source developer, so he was like, I understand how hard that is, how bad the UI is. So give it a shot. And yeah, and not only that, but I say he helped me with that, but also when I got my first AAA job, he was a reference that I used when I went to the interview, and they knew who he was, so that was kind of cool.
Very nice. Arvind or Shamus?
Shamus.
Yeah.
I got the perfect interview. I met a guy that loved Advance Wars, and I was like, oh my god, another human loves Advance Wars that I've met in person.
Yeah.
So we kind of hit it off.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool.
That was after Good Robot, of course. And making Good Robot was a lot of fun too.
Mm.
I think it was probably the first time I worked that closely with like a C++ like ground up type project.
Mm. Yeah.
And, we still talk about the OpenGL weirdness. That was like so many blog posts from Shamus about that.
Right. Right. How to get the lighting system and the
Yeah.
occlusion to work and everything.
Yeah, I forget why he went with OpenGL for DirectX. Maybe it was like the platform compatibility or something. But it had a lot of like strange artifacts that like aren't in most other games because they just default to DirectX, which has its own problems too, of course.
Right.
Won't be game development if you didn't have a problem with everything you had to work with.
Uh-huh.
It shouldn't be like that, but here we are.
How's
So-
Jonathan Blow's programming language coming along again?
He's still working on it. Yeah, he's still working on it. Oh boy.
I feel like there's like a little tally count of like worst tools I've ever worked with. It's like constantly being updated as I go to new projects. It's like, oh no, here's a worse one.
No.
I've never seen worse than this. Wait, hang on. Hold my beer.
Yeah.
We're gonna contact the server every time you change a table. And where's the server? Oh, it's in Montreal. Oh, that might take a while.
Oh no.
If it drops a packet, what happens? Dunno. It could crash.
no.
It could invalidate your data.
Oh no.
There were some times like that.
Wow. Fortunately, I've not had to work. I work in engineering, so I don't have to work with janky tools too much. Although, what is it? Revit is pretty jank because it was originally like an architectural tool, and so it's all designed around the architectural workflow. And but then because the architect usually runs all the other disciplines, like they're kind of like the coordinator, the central discipline. The architect's like, well, we're going to do this all in Revit. It's awesome. It's really easy to use. And it's like, yeah, but that's because it was designed for your workflow. And like all the mechanical guys are having a nightmare. All the civil guys are having a nightmare. And the electrical guys can't do anything. And
Right.
yeah. It's no good when you've got bad tools.
That's like the visual scripting argument where they're like, the people that use it think, oh, well, it's so much better than actually using code. But anybody that uses code is like, but code is faster, more accurate. You don't
Right.
spend like 6 pages doing math with huge math nodes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In college, I had to do there's the robotics Lego Mindstorm, and they had their own
Really?
connected
That's
blocks,
super cool.
with like the blocks you connect together in a node graph or whatever. And
yeah.
it's really cool, except that like you were saying, you end up with problems with like trying to do simple operations or loops or some sort of condition tree, and it just becomes really, really cumbersome.
Yeah, like it's simple, but then you get into something that's like really easy to do in code. It's one line, and it's like 2 pages of interconnected nodes. You're looking at it going, does that look right? It's a visual representation of something that's pretty abstract.
Yeah. So somebody somewhere in the community on the internet put together a C-like programming language for Lego Mindstorms, and you load up the program and like compile your program and download it to the Mindstorm, and then it's like, you're back in text land and everything is wonderful. So
I actually know more about that than you might think, because I in my high school had an engineering program where we used Lego Mindstorm, and we used that specifically to write our code for our little,
the C, whatever it
robot.
was, Mindstorm C or something. Yeah, it's so much more powerful, right? Like once you understand what you're doing, like if you're a toddler and you're moving the blocks around, then it's fine for visual. But as soon as you understand like what's happening, you've got to have a text-based programming language.
Yep, that's I got started on that ever since working on Good Robot. Actually, I was like, so this is how code actually works deep down. Like, I'd done code before. I'd worked on a couple of mods and things like that, but I had never made a game from scratch up until around then.
Right.
See, I'm clearly like on the least technical angle here. Like my job is web content publishing. I have to work with marketing team. Like I know HTML and CSS mostly, JavaScript, I kind of hate that they're making it more into of a real programming language. Because that means it's like, well, there goes that. But that's the thing. Like there was a joke at my college where I started software engineering, but then I went to IT, which is what a lot of people did. And if you do that, basically instead of standing for information technology, IT stands for I tried.
Oh no.
And it was accurate to me, I tell you what. But that's the thing. Like I tried different. I couldn't do the calculus. I couldn't do a lot of the deeper like programming stuff for some reason. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But the funny thing is, I still remember being in high school, well, middle school actually. I was experimenting with stuff like RPG Toolkit. I tried to start experimenting with what was it, a game maker.
Yeah,
I think that's one of those areas where it's like this is like maybe that was where I had to stop was, you know, I'm working through the game maker tutorial trying to make the stupid clown face bounce around, and it only bounces off of certain surfaces, and I'm looking between the tutorial and what I got in the scripting code, and I'm like, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? It looks the same. What is going on here? And it's like, you know, if I can't get Game Maker to work, I can't make games. Those who can't critique, that's me. That's where I'm stuck at.
Well, Game Maker was also one of those that had the visual interface. I remember using it when I was like little and trying to. I would make some kind of dumb like side scroller or something, and I was like, all these blocks, oh, that's so cool. And then like I realized that you can actually write code for it like much later. I think we were prototyping a game at Pterodactyl, and I was like, let's try it out, and it was pretty cool. I think that's probably where I got started after doing mods. It was like the first real thing I made in the game engine, but it was definitely weird. I think the Game Maker is like its own language, right? It's got like Game Maker
something like that. It is its own, and that's the funny thing because RPG Toolkit was the same, and RPG Toolkit was like a cheaper version, more independent version of RPG Maker. And I wasn't, granted, I was in middle school at the time, but I wasn't good with that scripting language. And I'm trying to remember, like, if there was anything. I think conceptually, I like the idea of a level editor,
right?
But I don't have the patience, I think, to make an actual good level, because it's like this weird kind of planning stage. I don't know.
It's a huge thing to plan, and you want to get started before you're done planning. And if you get started before you're done planning, then you run into problems with your layout.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
The one thing that I wish I had continued practicing more of was sprite art, because now it's like I don't have the time. Like I've started working on it and trying to practice a little bit. I don't have the time, and also I'm just, as much as I drew as a kid, I'm terrible with color theory. Awful.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible with colors too. The doctors say I'm colorblind. I don't think I am. I can see like red and green and blue, but just like I don't know how they're supposed to make you feel, right? Yeah, it's just like I don't know. There's a bunch of colors. What do you want from me? My wife is the total opposite. She like really cares about colors, and so it's nice having someone to go to. But yeah, I don't know colors upside down from right side up.
I don't look at the theory and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like I see the colors and how they connect. Why do you combine them in these ways? What is that? Where's the magic here?
Right. Well, that's the thing, is like you look at some of these really gorgeous, especially the PlayStation era sprites, and you zoom in on them and you're like, why do you have some of these colored blocks here and there? Like you got a random purple block, just one purple pixel in the middle of all of this. Why? How did you know to put that there? And I don't know, man.
And stuff like dithering and whatever, where they're like, oh, well, we wanted like a different shade, so we put these next to each other so they look like an in-between color, and you're like, does that always work? No.
That's one of those weird things. That's one of those weird things that you have two colors separately, but then you put them together. You put one color in between two colors. It's that stupid blue and gold dress, right?
It is exactly.
It's that whole whatever, going on. How the brain registers stuff.
Right.
That's the funny thing though. Like again, like there were some of Shamus's posts that I love to read, but then like there are other things. Like if you look up, Capcom has their R&D department has a channel, that they've got a lot of videos where they discuss their RE engine and how it was made. Most of it is just whoosh right over my head. But I remember watching it and being like, oh my goodness, I wonder if Shamus has time to watch this. I feel like he'd like this. But it also answered a question I had for him one day, because I remember talking to him like, I love the RE engine. Like, why doesn't Capcom like license that out? Because Shamus helped me realize how difficult making an engine is. I still remember, I believe it was on The Escapist where he discussed the problem with Bethesda making a new Elder Scrolls engine, and how it's not just like they'd have to recreate all of the tools they already use, and how long that would take, kind of a deal. And that it wouldn't necessarily solve all of their problems. Like, just making a new engine doesn't suddenly make all of their current problems go away.
Right.
And so,
and if you're not careful, then the people who are designing the new engine are used to the old tools, and so they just exacerbate the old workflow, so that now it has to be that way, instead of it just being a pain because it's easiest that way.
It's also like really easy on a new engine to end up with an engine that like the programmers understand, but no artist has ever actually used. So it hasn't got all those like little quality of life kind of like tickets come in to actually make it usable. So there's a whole bunch of things that go, yeah, it can do this, and then the artists look at it and go, that's the most awkward thing I've seen in my life. It can technically do this, but it's going to take me a year, to finish a single level.
That's part of what made the art, like, again, like, sorry to sidetrack a bit, but it's like the Capcom R&D videos on their RE engine. One of the things that makes it so fascinating is like they went back, because before that was their MT Framework engine, and I loved that. It's like I remember playing Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS and being like, how did they do this? How did they make a game that runs this well and looks this good on this system? And watching their video, the first thing they said was, yeah, the MT Framework was a piece of crap, so we wanted to go and like redo that and like fix these mistakes. And that was one of them. Was, it was great for, like, the programmers knew what they were doing, but like designers and graphic artists and all these others, like, they were struggling to get things done. So that was one of the first things we wanted to do, was how do we build this engine so that the tools are easy for everyone to use, not just the programmers. And so reading that process, like, was absolutely fascinating to me. Like, it's, again, like, even if most of what they talk about is just whoosh over my head, it's like this little glimpse into behind the scenes, and just yeah.
I imagine this is like half of GDC talks. I've only been to one, but like I figure a bunch of them are probably these like deep dive tech things, and I know companies also share them internally. You'll have like a month or two, whatever, where they just sort of other studios' learnings and whatever, they publish them all and they give them out to all the employees.
I know they have some of those GDC talks on YouTube. I should look them up someday, because I find that stuff fascinating, to sit there and see their process, like the thinking process and how it all works.
Yeah, man, that one GDC I went to was really cool. I didn't even go to many of the talks. It was just like people I met. It's the kind of thing. Shamus hated travel, didn't he? Like, I was wondering why more of these things he wasn't interested in going to, and I realized he probably just dreaded leaving.
He discussed it after PAX East, and he even had said, like, the whole process of it was a lot for him. And it's a shame, because I definitely would have loved to, because I'm not too far from him. He was out in the grand scheme of things, because I'm around the Philadelphia area. He was out towards the Pittsburgh area. So technically, we're not that far in the grand scheme of the United States of America.
Right.
But, it's like PAX East was a lot for him, because there's
he was super introverted. He had anxiety problems, and both of those together plus travel was just like, it was not a good mix. And then like going somewhere to be around a ton of people, it's like, why would I put myself through hell to go to hell?
Right.
It's like,
exactly.
This is all downside.
Yeah. Because that's the thing, like, I love going to some of these conventions, but by the end of the week, I usually have a period where I'm like, you know what? I'm done, and I'm going to just camp out in my hotel room the rest of the weekend.
Yep, feel that.
Done.
Yeah. I've only been to one major convention. It was PAX Prime 14, I think. Yeah. Yeah, and I was an enforcer, so I like volunteered to be an enforcer. And I'm kind of an ambivert. Like I can be super introverted and it's fine, but I can also like switch into extrovert mode and just like be
Right.
pumped all the time. And it was a blast. Like I was going like talking to people all day for what, 4 days or something.
Right.
But like I can totally see how if there wasn't that switch in me and I just like had to be in introvert mode all the time, that would just be absolutely draining. And I think that's kind of where Shamus is coming from. He was just like, he doesn't have an extrovert mode, right? And so he,
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that's my brother in the background screaming. Destiny raids will do that to you.
oh no.
I'm actually not too. I'm somewhere in between as well. Like I like engaging with other people, but the thing is, like, I usually need an in or a degree of comfort. Like, if it's people I'm not familiar with, then there's almost no way I'm going to just open up and just start speaking. I need something that it's like I need a way in. Like, there was a conversation about the Halo games when I was at PAX East one year that I was like, you know what, I'm going to interject because I love talking about Halo, and it was the perfect
Right.
opportunity. So I was fine talking with strangers there, but if it's just strangers in line to play a game, I'm not going to just look at the person next to me and be like, so what are you looking forward to seeing? You know, it's like I'm going to just sit there and worry about looking like a complete weirdo.
You know, funny you mentioned that because when I was at GDC, I was in line for Pyre, the demo, because I love Supergiant games. Like they're probably what I would consider like the ideal indie studio in terms of size and like output and just games that are really cool. And so I was like, oh, I'll see what Pyre's about. You know, I've heard about it. And I do exactly what you said. I ended up talking to a random person in line about how much I love Bastion because we had a common thing. And like a guy next to us started talking about it as well. And like 5 minutes into the conversation, I kind of got the sense I was like, wait, are you actually part of Supergiant Games? And he's like, yeah, I'm the narrative designer. I wrote the story for Bastion. And I was like, oh no. I have so many questions.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't actually the first time that happened either. I also met the guy that made Dwarf Fortress just talking to Arvin. I thought he was a random person off the street. He didn't even look like a game dev. He was
Tarn
a
Adams.
random guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
He was
a
still
very
talking
he's a
to
very
Arvin.
chill dude.
He's super chill. Like you could tell all the other devs apart just looking at them for the most part. You'd be like, okay, the gamer shirt, carrying a whole bunch of tech, you know, looks out of place. And he just blended in completely into the environment. And I looked like Arvin was just talking to someone who was taking a walk in the park.
That's cool.
He was super
See,
cool.
I'm of the misfortune where anytime I do meet someone that does that kind of work, it's usually like outside of my wheelhouse kind of a thing. It's like, oh yeah, I worked on like, I don't know, no, I haven't actually met anyone like this, but it's like I worked on Age of Empires. It's like, oh, that's cool. My brother loves strategy games, and it's like that's the most I have to offer.
I don't know anything about
goodness.
that.
I know it looks like it's a good version of what it does. Like that's about all I can offer.
Oh, man.
You don't have a mouse on a console. What was the last like RTS that was really big on anything but PC? Because I feel like that's probably why it's one of those less common genres these days.
I was always angry nobody tried it on the original Wii, or even the Wii U. Now that I think about it, because it had a touch screen.
Yeah,
like these things should have been obvious, and yet nobody wanted to do it. I don't know if any of them ever got big. I know on the Xbox and maybe Xbox 360 they tried a bit. Like Halo Wars they tried and stuff like that.
StarCraft was on PlayStation, I think. Yeah.
you and nobody
like that.
Nobody looks back fondly on that. It was either that or it was like N64 or something like that.
Oh, you're right. I think it was N64.
Didn't the RTS kind of get like as a genre get kind of dumbed down into the Farmville like, and then that kind of went into mobile?
Yeah, or maybe.
Like the base building part of it kind of turned into like a Farmville thing where you're like choosing just your base stuff, and then all the unit control gets automated or it goes off screen.
Right.
I don't really know. I honestly really couldn't tell you. I feel like maybe tower defense is
Yeah,
what it moved
there's
to,
TDs.
something like
Well, and
that.
like I feel like the whole genre kind of split into two parts. Like there's the base building part and the unit management part. And
Yeah, yeah.
the unit management turned into like MOBAs more or less. And the
Because
base building turned into more like Farmville or like city builders like City Skylines or something.
right, or Satisfactory or something like that.
Right. Yeah,
Or
there's yeah,
Yeah,
Factorio is like the whole base building thing.
right.
And
I didn't even think about that.
like
Yeah,
they it kind of like bifurcated and then specialized in those two things, and like RTS was seemed like it was kind of like an early progenitor of those two things, but wasn't really specialized enough in either to be like competitive.
Yeah, and you had like turn-based tactics games kind of just off on their own little like weird corner somewhere
Mm,
between an RTS and like an RPG.
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
funny thing. The closest to a real time strategy I ever played was like Ogre Battle 64,
Right.
which doesn't really count because you also have the pause element. So like real time
yeah.
with pause,
Real
and
time with
then like
pause basically becomes a like a turn base with variable turn time.
What an
so
incendiary topic to bring up around my friends too.
Oh yeah.
There's always an argument about real time with pause.
yeah.
Why was that
It's like
so contentious?
people that play CRPGs sometimes have like an attachment to real time with pause, and anybody that comes from like anywhere else, including me, I look at real time with pause and I was like, I'd rather it just pause or be real time, and I don't like the real time that much, so I'd rather it just pause
Sure, be turn
because like
based, and it increments it
yeah,
and makes it so that you don't have to worry about how long your pause is and stuff.
it's kind of the same argument as like Final Fantasy VII's real time battle thing, where it's like you're getting punished for
Mm.
scrolling through like an awkward menu, and you're like, you're the one that made the menu awkward. Why are you punishing me?
Yeah.
There's 50 items on this list. And I gotta get to the bottom of it using a controller.
Which one are you talking about? The new one or the active time battle?
I'm talking about the original active time battle and
Okay,
that
see, I
general phase.
that's the funny thing. Like as I've gotten older, I actually started to like those. But like I cranked the active time battle speed up, but then I also set the cursor to memory, so I don't have
Right.
to go flip through. It's like every character is a different class, and um, so that's what I've kind of and I've actually come to like want more of that. Like it's
Hmm.
not just the like okay, turn based is coming back, but it's like either a game's either an action RPG or it's a full blown turn based,
Yeah.
and it's like I want the active time battle system back. It had so many custom options. You could crank that battle speed down and set it to wait when you're on the menu, or you could just crank the battle speed up and set it to active so you get punished if you're hunting too long in the menu. And it's
But
like
I don't want to be punished for being in a menu.
some
Right,
of
but you
us
can
like
set
the
the option, I
challenge.
think is the point, right? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
get to you
You
get to
could,
slide
yeah.
that slider wherever you want. It does make it weird though when you have so many when there's a broad range of options in a game, because then it makes it difficult to talk to other people about what you did, right? Like if you're playing in a, super slow pause menu mode
Mm.
and someone else is playing at like maximum speed with no pause, then there'll be like, man, I had all this gear and I, managed to pull off this battle, and meanwhile you're like, I had all this gear and like I was able to min max it, so that this crazy thing happened. And it's almost like you're playing two different games, even though it's under the same title. It's technically the same
Yeah.
code.
Like anyone that's ever played a Total War game would probably know, like about the whole micro cost thing too, where it's like, if you had three of you running the battle at the same time, would it go better? Because in turn-based, it wouldn't go better because you can look at the whole thing and just make the optimal decisions. But in
Yeah.
real time, you can only pay attention to so much at a given time,
Yeah.
and you can make terrible mistakes just by not paying attention.
Although the Civilization games kind of pushed that envelope, because there were so many things there. You could get into a situation where there were so many things happening in the game world at once that even inside of a single turn, you could lose track. You could lose the narrative,
Yeah,
right? And so then
yeah.
it's like even the pause didn't help you so much. You needed like some sort of meta system for keeping track of what on earth you were doing at
Right.
like three times at
You needed
once.
like sub turns, like per continent.
Yeah, exactly. Or like
Done
some
here,
sort
done
of,
here, done here.
well, like when they added unit movement, multi-turn unit movement, that was a huge boon, because then you could be like, all right, where's this unit going? Oh, I can see, like in 5 turns he's going to be over there. Okay, I understand why I sent him over there now.
Yeah.
Although even then,
Right.
sometimes you sent a spy somewhere, and it's like, did I send him there to like intercept caravans, or was I going to sabotage the enemy city, or like what was I going to send him over there to make peace with them? I don't remember. It was 5 turns
Right.
ago, which was like 3 hours ago.
Yeah. And
Realize
when you get an alert saying that their target is invalid or whatever, because it got blown up, and you're like, wait, what were they here for originally again?
Yeah. It's like, I guess they live here now.
Yeah.
I just
man.
realized what might make me a bit of a weirdo is I forgot all about Brutal Legend, and I actually liked that game. But it got a lot of backlash because a lot of people didn't expect the RTS element, and
That's
then the
a very weird
RTS.
choice.
The
To be fair.
I kind of understand why. I mean, you're the roadie. Then again, I don't know. I really liked it as this unique thing, but the RTS elements weren't actually very complicated. If you tried,
you should give an
to-
intro, Chris, because I am so unfamiliar with Brutal Legend. All I know is that it's like some sort of metal. It's like super metal or something. Like I know nothing about it otherwise, and that was kind of out of the box. Like what's the deal?
So the demo came out, and everyone thought it was going to be just a 3D action kind of a game, maybe
like
with Zelda
Darksiders.
elements.
Or something
Yes,
similar, right?
along those lines.
To a degree. I haven't played Darksiders, so maybe I'm totally off.
I'm trying to think of a good comparison, but I don't really know of one because the demo was very brief. But it did look like okay, maybe linear-ish, heavy metal. You swing a guitar like an actual axe, and people were just expecting a sort of adventure game, action adventure. Let's use that most vague, pointless
game.
category name.
Every
Sure.
game.
And so like that's what people were expecting, and that was all the demo was. And I think EA intentionally kept the RTS elements out of the marketing until like right before launch. Like
Yeah.
I think it was like 2 days before the game came out, XPlay had a preview of the game that was showcasing the different armies for multiplayer. And it was like, wait a minute, what kind of a game is this again? It's you gave us a demo and you didn't have what the bulk of the game's going to be? What?
Yeah, like was that the era of like EA having like super deceptive or just like weird marketing? Because I remember like Alice came out at the same time, and they got a trailer that looked like it was a horror game, like deep into a horror game, and then it ended up just being an action adventure type game.
I don't know who EA's marketing team was at the time because not long after, do you remember the for Dead Space 2, the Your Mom Hates Dead Space?
Yeah, I remember that.
And I remember at that point, I was out of college at that point, so I'm sitting here like, I don't care if my mom hates Dead Space.
Yeah, wait a
I don't need
minute.
her
What do you know
approval.
about my mom?
What if my mom loved violent? What if my mom is the one that introduced me to John Carpenter's The Thing, huh? Like,
Were they the ones behind Dante's Inferno as well?
oh
was, like,
my
the
goodness, yes.
That was
They
the
were
worst
trying.
yeah.
campaign ever.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
It
that was
was-
also the same studio. Oh, that was Visceral Games as well.
It
Oh,
seemed
God.
like they saw the Sonic the Hedgehog marketing where it's like, oh, Sonic is edgy and he's a bad boy, and they're just like, that's the best idea. 90s marketing, that's gotta be that's the peak, the golden age. If only we could get back to that.
You'll gross out your sister. Your mom will hate it.
Right,
See, this is the funny thing about EA because I think we're entering a phase where they're actually in some kind of level of self-correction, but it's not going to last, and they're
No.
they're going to sabotage themselves. But
I hope
'cause that's
not,
the thing,
but
like, back-
it does seem like it's going to happen.
Brutal Legend was that era though where they were like, we want to have new IPs, we want to have these new games, and we want them to be interesting. Like they were trying to not do the every game must have multiplayer route. And that's when Dead Space came out. That's when Mirror's Edge came out. Activision had abandoned Brutal Legend, so they took up Brutal Legend themselves to publish. So they were able to finish development cheaply, put it out there, and hope to reap the benefits. But again, like except for Mirror's Edge and Dead Space, I guess their marketing teams were awful for all of these things. Because I forgot about
Mirror's
Dante's
Edge never
Inferno.
really made it, did it? I mean, it was always kind of a flop, wasn't it?
It was.
kind of
That's
weird.
the marketing was at least better because the marketing accurately portrayed what the game
Video
was going
game.
to be.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the trailer was all first-person parkour that looked like it was like if you were to, it would be like I know Seamus talked about it before. I know it was discussed in the comment section, but like the Left 4 Dead trailer. Oh, or it's like the intro movie when you like it was a trailer, but it was also the intro movie when you started the game up. The what is it? Attract screen, that's what they call it.
Yeah.
Um, it shows how the game plays. You have all the sound effects, you have all the musical cues for the different special infected. It accurately demonstrates playing the game in a cinematic fashion. Mirror's Edge was the same way. Mirror's Edge was all of these abilities you're seeing. It was a pre-rendered cinematic, but everything you're doing is reflective of the actual experience of playing the game. So Mirror's Edge had good marketing.
Because someone probably at some point played the video game and went, these are the things in the video game. Whereas I think that doesn't happen as often as you might expect.
In Dead Island, like, let's talk about really inaccurate like representations of the games you play. Dead Island is really up there. No, that's definitely, I don't know, that's something that's fascinating because like very rarely, because I don't even think usually the company's marketing departments handle the. I mean, you would know more than I would, but like usually they outsource to a marketing firm, don't they?
They actually usually outsource to several, and then they take like the best trailer that they like. To be fair, I think the trailers are somehow like informed by teams at the studio, but like they get made by advertising companies usually. Sometimes it's internal. I'm just thinking in general. I've definitely seen both.
So,
if you get like 3 or 4 trailers, and they end up getting like kind of filtered through usually.
To dial back a bit to Brutal Legend.
Okay.
That's
I put a link to the Mirror's Edge article that Shamus wrote in the comments there, but yeah.
Oh, cool.
He never wrote anything about Brutal Legend as far as I can tell.
I'm not sure what his thoughts are because it wasn't his style of music. Like that's the thing. Like
he was very audio, like he's visual, but like he was also really like tuned into audio stuff.
Whereas me, it was like right up my alley, and it even introduced me to some songs and bands that I was like, oh man, I never knew about this. But that's the thing, like it's one of those weird things where its Venns didn't diagram so well, if I can put it weirdly. So as soon as you get done that introduction, you're out on your big vehicle. You have an open world that is before when open worlds were still sandboxes, right? You still dotted the landscape, but you weren't designing a world to. You weren't designing an open world. Well, I don't know. Like, there's something weird about the evolution of the open world. Because again, like once upon a time, it was a sandbox. It wasn't always called open world. I don't know when open world became the standard term. But this was
somewhere between like GTA 3 and 4, maybe.
This was like trying somewhere between being like a sort of Zelda-ish open world to an RPG open world to what we'd more expect today, I guess. But it had like icons of things that you could, play a guitar solo on and unlock and gain powers. You had battles you could do. Like it had a bunch of activities on there. But then the main draw is no matter what you did in order to progress the story, you had to collect units for your army, and then your army was basically all the roadies and everything involved in a concert. Right. Not necessarily a band, but because you had the guys that roadies were a unit where they were kind of a stealth unit that carried giant big speakers on their shoulders and backs. You had the fans, which are your main like attack unit, which just headbang with these giant foreheads, kind of a thing.
This sounds a lot like Sacrifice, which is another weird Shiny Entertainment game from like, I want to say like 2001 or something.
This one was Double Fine.
Yeah,
Brutal Legend was Double Fine, so not Shiny, but I could see them being. I could see that.
It was the first RTS like third-person action game hybrid that I could think of that came out. I remember this one because I was a PC gamer for like an eternity.
What was the name of it again?
First console I bought, Sacrifice. Speaking of, if you have a moment to check out Sacrifice, like the quotes from that game, it had like an all-star cast of voice actors. It had like Tim Curry in it, and I forget his
Wow.
name. The guy who plays Samurai Jack was in it as well.
Yeah, that was from
Oh,
2000.
cool. And that was, what was the guy's name? Doug Perry? No,
I think.
something Perry, I think.
Yeah.
Big guy in Shiny Entertainment. Um,
I was just trying to
because they
get
did a lot of interesting stuff.
the timeline right here. It looks like so Sacrifice came out in 2000. The other thing that Brutal Legend kind of reminds me of in like a pastiche sense is the God of War series. And God of War came out 2005,
Right.
and then Brutal Legend was probably started development around the same time, but then got passed around and came out in 2009. So I wonder if the choice to make it an RTS was also to kind of differentiate it from the God of War series, which was still developing at the time, and try to like get it its own niche in the gaming space.
Yeah.
Based off of Tim Schafer's interviews, he had this idea cooking for a while. Evidently, he knew a guy that toured or roadied with Megadeth. I think it was that he had conversations with.
Oh,
I think it was Megadeth. Like it was one of those thrash metal bands, kind of a thing. That was, I think, what inspired the idea originally. But like I think this idea was even before Full Throttle, but he never went with it. But and again, like this is me fuzzy memories of interviews I read over a decade ago.
sure.
But Herzog's Way was what he quoted as his inspiration for the gameplay. So it was always meant to be an RTS. So it might have been they looked at God of War when they were doing the melee combat element, because that's the thing, like you're commanding these units, but you're also the leader.
Okay, so you got like a hero
They're trying to
character.
hybridize it.
And you can stand on the stage at the mic and give commands from a distance, but you're kind of meant to go to be on the field as well, because if you play certain guitar solos on the field, they have different effects. And then the enemy leader is also on the field. So in order to inhibit the enemy's progress, you want to find their leader, bust their leader up and attack, because the leader can do more damage to the enemy units and therefore help progress. So for me, it's this mishmash of genres that's right up my alley. But as I said, like if you have Venn diagrams of like interest in like story heavy comedic games, interest in RTS, interest in heavy metal, like they don't mishmash so well. And it's a shame because but it is one of those things where it's like, wait, is that technically the biggest art? Like I'd have to go back and compare sales, but it's like, is that technically the biggest RTS on console? And chances are no, it probably is Halo Wars.
True. I was gonna say it might be.
No, it's probably Halo Wars, because Halo.
It's kind of amazing that game actually got made, because it's, like you said, it's a creative risk that I feel like AAA doesn't normally like. Like, if it's any kind of like gameplay that's inherently weird and non-standard as like a core loop, they're gonna be like, but like, what about the people that want to play? Yeah, like, how do you make it a games as a service model? How do you get microtransactions? How do you, you know, what about the people who play Call of Duty? Will they like this game?
So there's like multiple layers to this as well, because the game's going to have a hard time seeing any kind of revival, because some older games manage to live based on people streaming these older games. And then younger audiences see the stream, they go and they play the game themselves, and it gives it new life. Like every year I go to a convention, I meet kids roughly 13 years old that are Earthbound fans.
Right.
Which is weird, because it's like this game was obscure when I was a kid, and yet it's got such a cult following that every
it's like more
year,
popular than it used to be.
Yeah, it's like there are more people aware of it now than there was back then. But then you have Brutal Legend, and you can't stream it. There's way too much licensed music.
Yeah.
You can't stream it. So, and to that end, it's like, okay, well, how about remastering it? You have to license all of that music again.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, you could always have an AI generate music for you, right?
Oh God.
You know, the funny thing about talking about music licensing, I've actually been in a project that had to relicense songs for its own expansion and couldn't use them.
Oh
So
no.
like same game,
Oh.
just making more of it. Well, wait, take that out. We don't have the license for like the expansion.
Wow.
Oof. Licensing is such a weird thing,
Yeah, it
man.
gets strange.
Hmm.
Like that's and that's the thing too. Like right now, Microsoft, if they wanted to, and in some ways, Hi-Fi Rush makes me hope they could. If Microsoft wanted to, they could probably like, because they own Double Fine now, buy the Brutal Legend IP and be like, okay, make Brutal Legend 2 if you want,
Right.
and they'd be able to put it up on Game Pass, and there you go. But
Right.
it is one of those things where it's like, is this worth it?
Turn into a match 3 waifu simulator.
Oh man,
Then it'll sell gangbusters.
Okay, I
Get a
do want to
gotcha
get
bottle in
onto
there.
the topic of
Sorry,
mega
sorry,
corporations and corporate business practice and stuff, because it seems like we're going there. But first, I wanted to circle back to talking
Absolutely.
about colors a little bit, because Shamus has this lovely article he wrote about Star Wars: The Old Republic and how they
Oh, I
ruined
remember
it with
that one.
color grading.
Yes.
So I just posted a link there. I don't know if we have anything to say about this, but the earlier discussion about color just reminded me that Shamus cared
Oh,
about this, and
it was an era of color grading ruining video games.
yeah,
I don't know how long it lasted, but it was a time. Like Deus Ex,
absolutely.
I remember that. I think the earliest I can think of is like Hitman Blood Money had like aggressive color grading indoors.
Mm. And like,
was
there's
this
nothing wrong
a?
with having a theme, like
Yeah,
setting a theme for the level, right? Well, as a level designer, I'm sure you can speak to this, Ross.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it normally it starts with like concept art, and then it goes to what do we actually make, and then there's a level artist and a lighter and stuff that actually go in and try to make things work. But like color grading was like easy mode to get a color theme to a level, and it was too easy. It was like, okay, we want this level to be brown. Turn on the brown, and everything that might have not been brown gained a bit of brown, or potentially a lot of brown, depending on how aggressive you made the grading.
Mm.
Um, and you used to be able to handle this with things like lighting and even just art direction of like, okay, we're doing the desert level. Texture artist make a bunch of things that are brown in theme and look like this, and they would kind of you do it that way. And color grading was just kind of a way to, you know, the way it's used now is to make it a little bit more homogeneous than it previously is. It's like a compositing tool,
Sure.
like in film where they make things look more like similar on screen. It's
Well,
good for that.
and before they had universal global lighting models, it was a
Yeah.
way to kind of tie the lighting together too, because otherwise you had to do a lot of work behind the scenes to make it look like it was properly lit.
Right. Yeah, and you have yeah, and also like lighting. You have the choice of like what types of lights and whatever that previously people didn't care about. Like if you look at like Doom and Quake and whatever, it's just like, oh well, the light here is green. What's making the green light? It's the green is coming out of the wall. There's a little circle there,
Yeah.
And these days it's like you click on a light and it's like, what's the temperature of the light?
Yeah.
How many candles is the light? And you're like, what? The lighters will handle it. Don't worry about it.
So here's a question for you, actually, since you're in development. Does ray tracing make that easier, or not really more or less difficult in trying to determine some of these light sources? Like, just different?
I'm actually not sure if it affects light sources too much. It's more about what you can see off of reflective surfaces. So it's like you can look in a mirror and see like a perfect reflection around the corner. Um, but I don't think it actually calculates light bounces any differently, because if it did, you'd have two versions of the game with it on and off that would be like different amount of lit. Like you'd have like a dark version normally, and then ray tracing on, suddenly it gets more lit. So I think they're
I was
separated.
wondering about this. Because a lot of games that I tried ray tracing on, I didn't see much of a difference. And even like watching
Mhm.
Digital Foundry, like they'll show the difference between ray tracing, and it's like I look at it, and it's like the reflection, like Ghostwire Tokyo is the only game I would want ray tracing on for right now these days,
It's raining
because
all
it's
the
all
time.
wet. Yeah, it's raining all the time.
Yeah.
Everything's wet, so it's like reflections everywhere. You can see the difference there.
Hmm.
But most of the games I'm looking at, it's like you got like the magnifying glass. It's like
Right.
I can barely see it, bro. I can barely see it.
Yeah, like the difference is like if you look at, I'm going to use Watch Dogs as an example just for obvious reasons. You'd have surfaces that were like they were mapped, so it was just like you put a cube map here. I think that's how it worked. But you had basically the engine would have a sample, a picture in 8 directions. Like when you do one of those photos on a camera where you rotate it and you actually get like a full 360 degree what do they call it?
Photosphere.
Yeah, a photosphere type thing. It's just one of those in a video game, and it would sample that. So it would be like, okay, this is the closest one. It's a picture of the street, and it would reflect that, and it would look pretty convincing. It would be like a blurry, not super distinct picture of the street. You wouldn't be in it, It would just be like the surrounding environment, but it was convincing enough. That's how it used to work. With ray tracing, we're gonna like actually calculate the ray bounce of light to figure out like a real mirror reflection of what's around the corner, which is super expensive, which is why it's so like limited to graphics cards as they are. And you'd be able to see yourself actually standing there. Not that they couldn't do that before, but like I assume it's just like global, it reflects everything, it reflects light, it reflects whatever. But also, as I mentioned, I'm not sure it actually affects like the global illumination, like the ambient light.
Okay, because
yeah,
most of the time I've seen people talk about it, it's about the like shadows and everything are more realistic and all these other, and you can see in some extreme examples, but it's like when you see them in practice, and part of it's probably because they're trying to make these for consoles as well. So it's like, even if a graphics card on a PC can handle it, unless you're making just a PC game,
right,
you're going to have to
find that like 3070 whatever and like in your console hardware necessarily, or at least at the bottom level of your console hardware, because they often have to support like previous gen consoles in the release as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to see the difference in development until it's possible to deploy a game with only ray tracing.
Right, until you can assume every version of the game will have ray tracing, then we'll probably see a bunch of like games set in mirror land, full of like liquid mercury,
Or just games that are more reliant on procedurally generated content, that you can rely on the ray tracer to light properly and do the ambient occlusion, whereas otherwise you have to bake all that in and then you can't really generate it beforehand or on the fly.
It's
rather.
funny, up until it became a thing in gaming, my only experience with ray tracing was watching 3D Studio Max like take 500 years to render one frame. Like, it go a pixel at a time. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, to dial back a bit, though. Like, unfortunately, I can't really comment much on the Knights of the Old Republic color grading because I played maybe the tutorial of it. I wasn't a fan of D20 in video game form, and I think that's about it. Like that's all I can remember is like I bounced off the combat, so I didn't really play much. I didn't really play much of BioWare until Mass Effect 1 and Dragon Age Origins. And yet somehow I still feel a kindred spirit with all the BioWare fans that are like, oh man, they died off. It's like, I got in just when they were good, and then they disappointed me.
I know a lot of people love KOTOR, but I feel like if you play KOTOR, it feels very dated in terms of like, these days in an RPG, when you go to talk to people in town, everybody is a character. They're expecting you to talk to everyone. If you go to a town in KOTOR, half the characters, you're like, so what's going on in this town? They're like, well, the town is under attack, and man, that burger place is great. Talk to the next guy, man, that burger place is great, and the town is under attack.
Yeah.
You walk down oh my god, what a good burger. Did you know the town's under attack?
I feel like it's the opposite, actually. I feel, because again, growing up with JRPGs, I was used to going and like talking to everyone in town, and now it's like, no, not unless it's a real throwback RPG like Octopath Traveler or Bravely Default. Like, you're not talking to everyone in town. You're like, most of those people are just window dressing. Yeah. Set dressing is a better word, yeah.
They didn't expect you to talk to them all in BioWare. I think those games, they expected you to treat it like a D&D campaign and just to ask one person,
Yeah. Yeah, they were there to give you the setting background. Yeah. They weren't there as characters.
Yeah, Mass Effect especially. Yeah, Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins, like, you might overhear people when you walk by them, but only like a few people you could actually talk to, I feel like.
Yeah, they split it up. Like, it was all unique interactions. You never got like doubled up dialogue, or you never got another thing I noticed in KOTOR and in Neverwinter Nights 1 was like, we have a formula for our writing, and gosh darn it, we're going to stick to that formula. You're going into like a new type of activity, be it Pazak, swoop racing, whatever. it's always going to be the same tropes for every character. You got like the beat up old man you fight first, who's just terrible in general and he's just miserable. Then you've got like the rookie, and then you fight, the person who's competent in the middle, and there's always like a champion at the end. And I was like, I've seen these tropes within the same game like 4 times already. Here comes like, like the crotchety old guy. Yep, here he is. Here comes the rival,
Right. And it's like Pokemon, right?
Yeah.
Here comes Brock
for every
again.
possible activity. Right. But imagine if there was a Brock for like everything you did. You're going to like the mini game for dressing up Pokemon. Here comes the Brock for fashion. Here comes the Brock for like food.
Right.
Sure hope you don't have any water Pokemon. Oh no. Oh,
yeah, I think Mass Effect was the first one I could think of that's like the modern. No, what maybe did Dragon Age precede Mass Effect? I forget. One of those two is the more modern BioWare style.
Dragon Age was after.
Right.
Because I know like Mass Effect I was a little late on because like all my roommates were like, "Oh my gosh, this game is amazing," and then I started playing it a few months later, and I had a big period where there was a break there. And I was like, it's not bad. And then like when I got back, it was right at the what's the name of the mission? It's the planet where like all the big reveals happened. And from that point on, I was like, oh wait, this game's really good again. Like I guess I was like never huge on Mass Effect. But Mass Effect 1 I did like the best, because then with Mass Effect 2, it's everything like Shamus wrote about, right? Like I could tell it's like this game's less of an RPG. It's ammo system is silly.
Right.
It's a shooter at this point, and the story's dumb, but at least I like the characters.
Right. It's like it was for some reason they decided to completely disconnect it from any other thing, past and future, and I was like, wait, but you're making a trilogy, right? And like Shamus said, it's like you have a rare opportunity you almost never get in video games. You're making 3 games. What do? Make 3 games that have nothing to do with each other. That don't think forwards or back.
Oh,
that's so gracious. Frustrating.
Well, and like, it's one thing to have the wasted potential, but it's another thing to knowingly market it as this is a set of 3 games that go together, and then waste the potential.
Right. And it's like, especially your choices will matter.
Is there a game series that exists as a trilogy that actually managed to stick the landing? Because again, like I'm a big Halo fan, and for me, Halo 3 is like a low point.
Yeah, I agree. I people hate me for it, but I agree. I think Halo 2 is the best one.
Me and a bunch of my friends streamed that last year, and my one friend, like, because he never got into Halo, so he wanted to stream it with me. Me and him went through the first game and the second game. And then the third game, we brought on 2 more friends for the 4-player co-op. And dude, like that last level with all the flood, like just it was attrition. It was just keep running forward. If you die, wait till you respawn and just keep running forward, right? It's like this weird, like you'll get picked up by the next guy by virtue of respawning. Like Halo 3, oh my gosh, like
does The Witcher count?
I'm going to stop here because I can't.
Yeah, well, The Witcher 3 is
Halo 3, but
pretty broadly described as the best of the 3 games, right?
I think it's sticking the landing for sure. I think Witcher 1 was like a old RPG jank in a slightly new era. It was like out of date at the time, but it just barely went under the radar in terms of like being really jank. But to these days, it's super jank.
I mean, Shamus is who introduced me to The Witcher in general, because I was reading his posts about the first game.
Yeah, I think 2 has some of the best stuff in all the Witcher games. I really liked some of the things they did, and I wish they brought them back. I like getting killed for bad decisions and then reloading like 2 seconds before, just to see the consequences of my really dumb choice. That was fun. I like switching character perspectives. That was really good. Also why I like Halo 2. Where they're like, now you get to play as not the Master Chief, but the Arbiter for a mission. You're like, wait, totally new perspective, new characters, this is what it's like to be in the Covenant for a thing. And it's the same thing in The Witcher.
He's also an actual character?
Yeah, he's an actual character. The Witcher did a cool thing, though. It made you play as the villain of the arc.
That's
for, like,
cool.
Just the intro. And you had choices, but they were all choices he would make. So you got to roleplay, but, like, your role-playing was, these dudes are, like, at the mercy of your army, and they're like, we surrender. they want a certain amount of money to join your side, and you basically have the option of you get half or you get nothing or I kill you. There is no give them what they want. You can either give them not as much as they want or nothing. And that was a great way to introduce the character. And you met his like lieutenants and everything, and then Geralt enters the scene and you swap to Geralt. And it's like that was so cool.
The funny thing is, because again, like I never played Witcher 1 or 2, so I went into Witcher 3, and I feel like for me, like, and I'm hoping Dragon's Dogma 2 kind of does it. It's like I feel like something that takes the combat of Dragon's Dogma, but some of the world elements of the story elements, I should say, of Witcher 3, and you get like my perfect role playing game of that style. Because with Witcher 3, the combat wasn't bad, but it's like at this point I expect, I guess, more, especially because it's all got all this like talk about like preparation and other things that I barely felt like I needed, like, and it's such a jump too, because like true. people talked about like, oh, the combat in Witcher isn't really all that difficult. Okay, I'll try it on hard mode, and then it's like ridiculous. It's like, okay, you no in between.
They use the normal mode. Difficult is not the word. It's not all that good. It's not terrible, but it's never been like a super polished, like feel good combat system. It's just been functional.
It's function. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. It's functional. But my big thing is too. It's like this is a big world with all these quests, and I don't care about most of them, and they keep me from feeling any narrative momentum going forward.
But I think it was the first RPG I can think of, though, that all the side quests were like a proper story, not like up in lights. This is a side quest. Don't care about it. Don't care about it. Please don't care about it. Don't think about it.
Most of them are. I mean, the thing is, at some point for me, it's like you kind of get tired of the going to the quest, find a twist that means it's not like it really is. Fight against nihilism a bit longer, and then go to the next quest. And it's like, what? You got like how many hundreds of these scattered across the map? By the time I was at Skellige, I was really getting sick of the formula. But at the same time, when it comes to character moments in writing, this is the one thing like and I know this is one of the big things that Shamus was big on, because I think that might have been our first podcast he was a guest on, was actually having him as a guest for Witcher 3. Because I had finally played it. My buddy Steve had been on me about playing it.
Well, I should watch that. That sounds good.
And I know, I knew Shamus really liked it, so I sent him like tentatively. I was like, "Would you be interested?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'd be cool with it." Yeah. So he was on there, and one of the things that we all did agree on though was like it had great character writing, and that's where like again, if you enjoyed what BioWare was doing up until Mass Effect and Dragon Age Origins, and then after that you were just disappointed consistently. Witcher 3 was the improvement of that, because like the drunk Witchers is all I'll say. That great moment.
That was so cool. Didn't it come
perfectly
out at the same time
written
as Dragon Age 3 as well? Like what an absolute like terrible thing to go up against as Dragon Age 3.
That's like every Horizon game going up against either Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring.
Oh, no.
But, no, then you also, like, one of my favorites was actually, I think, your final optional quest with, oh shoot, what are the love interest names?
Triss and Yennefer?
Yennefer, that's right. The one with Yennefer. Like, your final one with her, it's like, I never read a Witcher book. I didn't play the first two games yet. That quest was like, that got me interested in those characters a lot. Like, that quest was so good.
The end of that quest, if you pick Triss, is like heartbreaking.
Ooh, I can imagine
have you done that?
Okay. I don't even remember what, because I think when I was playing the game, I was like, I as a person prefer Triss, but
if you played the previous games,
it feels like the game is really pushing Geralt and Yennefer. And watching the Netflix show, it's like, okay, that's what they're really pushing is Geralt
from the
and
books.
Yennefer.
Yeah, because she was a big character in the books.
So as a result, I think I went with that instead. But that's part of what also made it really good. Because again, it's like just because I don't want to discuss so much. Like the game's been out for a long time, but if you've never played it, that's a quest that's better going in without any knowledge about it.
Yeah, it's just I'll say it's very, very good. It's actual drama.
Yeah, and it's like real character stuff, real.
Yeah.
And again, it's interesting decisions. Like, oh wow, what would I do in this situation? Like, it feels real, and it's not a stupid video game choice where it's like, good option, kick the puppy option.
Right.
It's like, wow, this actually has to do with like character, like actual like our lives and fate and other things like that. How do I respond to this? Like,
right. I had a moment where I was watching Geralt look really sad, and I was like, "Why isn't he crying?" And then it occurred to me, the Witchers can't cry, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Oh, dude. You know
they
what?
Don't have the ability.
You know what? There is one moment from Dragon Age Origins that it was my second playthrough. And the whole purpose of this was to be like my achievement hunt playthrough where it's like, okay, now I do all the bad options.
Right.
Though they weren't as obviously like, the evil options.
Yeah.
They were closer to more the rogue option.
Right.
Character was a female city elf because I was a male dwarf the first time. And I had a romance with she had a romance with Alistair. And then we got to the part where you either spare or kill Loghain. I already killed him in my first playthrough, so in order to get the achievement for recruiting him, I was going to spare him. And dude, the dialogue that ensues, and your characters were romancing, is like, oh my gosh, this is heartbreaking. This is like heart-wrenching. And like I just remember, like, I don't even remember like the thought process. I don't think there was one, because then it's like right before Alistair's like going to leave, I have like 5 dialogue options, and I immediately just went to the please don't do this option. And it's like, oh man, oh, it was so good. It was so good.
I have a thought on the trilogy games thing as well, which is I think almost every game that comes out, the first version of it is going to be like not the best it could be. It's going to run into problems in development. It's going to have stuff that came in late that couldn't be actually like rolled into the game. The pipeline for a bunch of things that were made earlier like didn't have what they did later in mind. There's a whole bunch of things that end up like that. The devs are familiar with the tools at the end. If you make a game right after finishing a game, or even an expansion like that, it's probably going to be the best version of the original thing that you could imagine. If you get it soon enough that the team hasn't moved on to other projects or split up or anything, you have enough of the core devs, that's when you get like a best game. That's why I say like Halo 2 from Halo 1, or I'm trying to think of other examples like
Borderlands 2.
Yeah, well, exactly. Actually, it's a really good one because Borderlands 1 had so many things wrong with it, and the Borderlands 2 was like, let's just do that, but actually have a narrative that has a narrative.
Right. Not rework too much of it and stick the landing.
Twice there, I find this funny because Halo 2, I don't. A lot of people are down on Halo 2. I like it, but it is neither better nor worse than Halo 1 for me because it does enough things differently. It's not.
It's not an iterative sequel, really.
It's not. Well, it's not even that because it's more corridor oriented. You don't have as many open spaces, and open spaces is part of what defined the original Halo. But what it really did was the story. If the first game, because that's the thing, like when you mentioned that from the team perspective, right? There's a lot of issues. They can't get everything in there that they want.
Yeah.
At the same time, that's also the game that sets the expectations.
Yeah,
and so
part of why the second one is easier to make is that you have a scope defined for what your game is, and you can add to it or take away. You don't need to just kind of like take a stab in the dark of like, will this be good?
But now you also have the chance of running into something where you play the sequel and you have now your fan base is suddenly divided between, oh, this is an improvement and oh, this is worse.
Mhm.
And I think that might be one of the reasons why third games end up turning out like they do, because okay, well, we became divisive with our second game, and now we have all this mixed feedback. Let's try and make everybody happy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And but another thing, because you mentioned Borderlands 2, like the biggest problem with Borderlands 2 for me is it's bigger. Because you're right, if you look at raw mechanically and the amount of enemies and stuff, and even in terms of a lot of the writing, it is a better game than Borderlands 1. Now, I've never been huge on Borderlands to begin with, but
Mhm.
Borderlands 2, I understand why it got such fervor behind it, but for me, it was always too big.
Right.
Because the interesting thing is, by being a bigger game, the pace at which you leveled up slowed down.
Yeah, I mean, I've got other issues with Borderlands. Like, I think there's almost a Diablo misconception that people have of like more loot is better, shinier, bigger, better. And the problem with that is if you play like Diablo 2, actually, that's a great example. Diablo 1 to Diablo 2, because
Right.
Diablo 2 is same team. Let's refine it. Let's make it bigger. Let's add more cutscenes. Let's use all the things that we had before and like fine tune the loot. And but my point being, Diablo has a loot system where every I want to say like 2 to 3 minutes, you might see an item worth consideration. A lot of trash drops, but it's obviously trash. If
Hmm.
you play Borderlands, stuff is flying out of every locker, every like every enemy is coming out of the sky, it's exploding out of chests in front of you. Every single thing is like you have to look at it and you have to
I got
dig
so
through
sick of it.
the terrible UI to try and spot is this good, and it's probably going to be a replacement because like level is the most important thing in weapons, not like actual stats. And
Hmm.
rarity is kind of on top of that. So like you get a new gun once every like couple minutes that's possibly a replacement for your current gun. And the gun that you like goes completely down the drain and is totally useless in 3 or 4 levels. So it's like you end up looting constantly and there's loot fatigue. It really sets in. You're like, oh my god, I don't want to look at another gun. And then
Hmm.
3 guns come flying off an enemy and you're like, oh god, here we go again.
I just want to
See, the
sell
funny
them.
th-
Yeah.
See, the funny thing is, I remember when Destiny 1 came out as well, and everyone was complaining loot doesn't drop enough, and they were comparing it to Borderlands. And
Right.
meanwhile, I'm here like, no, man, you don't get it. This is perfect. Guns barely drop. I barely have to go into my menu because I'm also remembering 2 Human. That was one of the biggest issues with 2 Human, as
Hmm.
being one of the 5 people that played that game and didn't hate it.
Right.
Um, like constantly having because I never really played Diablo. I never really played these loot games. So
The
all of a
loot
sudden I
periodic
played
games. Yeah.
2 Human, and I had to learn to constantly go into that menu to constantly check equipment, and that menu ran like crap. Borderlands, constant navigation to check equipment. Darksiders 2, constant loot drops. So by the time I got to Destiny and it's barely any loot drops and everyone else is complaining, I'm like, this is perfect for me.
Yeah. Well, even if you have barely any loot drops, I think the important thing is meaningful loot. You can still have trash
Yeah.
fly out of things that you turn into money or resources or whatever. That's fine. It's just that like if you see a golden shiny, super unique item fly off an enemy every 5 minutes, you're checking every item, and you want that to be an actual moment where you go, ah, that's like the first time in an hour that I've seen one, or 2 hours, or 3 hours, and
You want someone to see that and know that they got a definite upgrade.
right.
Versus if every 5 minutes you're swapping your gun, then does that? This is the thing because that was one of their big marketing pitches as well. We have X number of guns in our game
We have
that are
billions, yeah.
yeah, we have tons of guns, and it's like yeah, and none of them are memorable
Right. They're all
because
just
it's
an
just
amalgam of parts.
yeah, it's like they end up being a general base model that has slightly different stats. So it looks good on the box as a bullet point, but in the end, it's like what you really mean is you got like 10 guns with different stats.
Yeah, you've got a bunch of axes along which you can add gun stuff, and they can converge in many different ways, but you're going to know, like, you're going to figure out pretty quickly what they are, the 3 or 4 things, which is probably fine for like filler weaponry, but it's missing the unique, like, there's only one of this type of feel, which is like, again, Diablo had uniques and it had rares. It had like a little stable of, I'm going to say, maybe 100 weapons that devs crafted by hand with custom art, and then it had the filler weapons right below that that were plenty good. They could replace your uniques in some cases too, but you know, they weren't intended to be the only thing you ever see. They
I'm
preserved that.
just noticing. Oh, I've been thinking about the fact that Paul's been very quiet, and now he's doing stuff on the video stream.
Yeah, my video camera died, so
Oh
it
dear.
froze. So I
Oh,
just covered it up so it wasn't distracting anymore.
okay.
I'm still here. I've never played Borderlands games. I've never played the Halo games, so I don't really have much input on the discussion
Right.
here. But please continue.
I was gonna say, please get us back on track.
Yeah.
Okay.
By all
Well,
means.
I can do that if we want. I was thinking we could talk about corporate, big corporate video game development, loot boxes, CEOs, and marketing and game writing.
My favorite Shamus topics.
Yeah,
Yeah, some
he's
of
got
his.
quite a few articles on those topics. I'm just going to paste in a few representative ones into the chat here, so people can
Actually,
follow along if they're interested.
I do really think I have him to credit as well for. I think I've gotten better at, like, part of it is just working in companies, right? And part of the real downside to that is you get exposed to the level of incompetence that
Mhm.
lives in professional companies. Um, Not the one I currently work for. No, my
Certainly
company is
not.
perfectly great.
But anytime you have a large group of people, which you need in order to do a large project, you're going to end up with people who aren't really pulling their weight, and uh, just by stint of inertia, some of those people are going to get in positions of power, and then you're going to end up with people who are making
Yep.
decisions for the whole group, and that aren't really qualified or in a good position to be making those calls. So I don't think it's a problem with video games specifically, but it is
Yeah.
kind of frustrating with video games because there seem to be gamers got a game, right? So like gamers can see like, oh, if game development is a game, then it seems like I should be able to construct a system where the incentives work out so that we get good video games out.
Yeah. Well, also you can see it's pretty visible how like big games company CEOs don't play video games. Like you can see the decision making is getting further and further apart from the person who just likes video games.
Mm,
Like because like I think developers are pretty close to that. They tend to get into it because they like to play video games, then they make video games usually. But even if they like making video games, they probably look at games that they like a lot, and they're not like the most mainstream thing ever usually, right? But then as it goes up the chain, you kind of have the CEOs, the people interested mostly in like representing shareholders making a profit, things like that, where they don't care at all about video games and may not actually play video games at all. They don't have any particular passion for bringing back old franchises, except that people seem to like them. They think,
The big IP idea. It's like we need a
right?
big IP that people were guaranteed to buy. And part of it is I feel like a lot of that is like, the idea of people graduating with a master's in business and everything where they have theory and everything that they try and run with, and you think you're making wickets. And video games are not wickets. They are something
Yeah.
very different. And to that extent, actually, I'd be. Oh, 'cause see, I was actually thinking of something else, and I was going to ask you since you got AAA experience. But before that, I'm wondering about. See, now my brain is like bouncing between like 5 different topics, trying to figure out what's about to
It's a
blurt out of
big
my mouth.
topic.
oh no.
Because there are so many different things to approach. But I guess okay, whatever there was lost and subverted. So, I guess for you, because right now one of the big constant topics is unions,
Mm,
and I come from a state where unions have sort of a bad reputation because I know a lot of guys that work blue collar and have to work unions, and some of it sounds worse than what I've ever had to deal with in a non-union corporate job.
Mm.
So I know that just because you have a union doesn't mean everything is fixed. Also, people seem to want protection from things that a union doesn't necessarily protect you from. But there's also different kinds of unions. And this is what I'm curious what you would think in the AAA industry
Yeah,
because
it's kind of because I think there is a
the
difference between like your
well
typical blue collar union and something like the Screen Actors Guild, right?
well what I'm thinking is because a buddy of mine not in this state, he works in a different state, but he works in a trade union. So the trade union basically he'll work on one job, but maybe he gets laid off from that job or they do something else. And that trade union will almost because he never worries about getting laid off. For me, getting laid off is oh crap, I don't know when I'm working again. For
Right.
him, it's some brief time off because he's never been worried because he pretty much always has work he's moving between. So, given the nature of AAA production in a lot of these cities, and this is the problem, here's the one problem I know already.
Mm.
It relies on living in certain cities where games production is big.
Yeah,
Um, but,
that is
if you,
sort of changing now, but not like it's not like it's completely different now, but it's shifting away from that with work from home. This
yeah,
The reason it hasn't just gone that way though is probably because there's a lot of tax laws and things like that that are at play where you can't have workers necessarily for these big companies that own an office in a place that pay taxes, whatever, that are out in other countries or whatever, or even in other provinces or territories or states, right? Like
yeah.
they have a lot of paperwork to deal with to make that possible in many cases.
That's what I'm wondering is like so let's say Montreal,
Mm.
within Montreal, within LA, within um, Silicon Valley, like you have trade unions that all of those lower level tasks, be it QA, art, coding, when your AAA project winds down and you don't have another project to put all of those resources on, because they're a trade union, you might lay them off, but that trade union is now already in talks with other companies starting things up. And it's like, all right, we can move these employees over
Mm.
to this studio. And so people are covered by a trade union. And then, if they get promoted, say, that's when they start working for that company. When you're in a position that no matter what phase of a job, of a game you're in, your position is more or less needed.
Right.
Now, how, again, being inside or having been inside, how viable an idea do you think that is?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like just because I've only worked at like so many companies, like my experience has actually been pretty good so far. Not so much in terms of like overall pay, but like at least in terms of crunch and overtime and horrible stuff happening at work that that would make someone not want to go into work. I don't think I see anything like that in the 5 years I've been, which has been pretty good, and it's been pretty chill as well, which I kind of appreciate. But I'm sure it's not the case at every company. Like you see all these things about certain studios, certain places. I know people that have worked at like Rockstar, for instance, that have like crazy stories. There was a guy I talked to at one point that we were talking about like meetings that had gone weird, right? Times people got angry and whatever, just about development. It'll happen with creative differences and whatever. And we were
Sure.
just going over, oh yeah, that person got mad. They stormed out that one time. Or like, yeah, they wouldn't want to talk all day. And then there was a guy that worked at Rockstar that was like, so like I saw some things, and we're like, oh, and he's like, yeah, throwing things, or like, oh, that's pretty intense. He's like, yeah, cocaine. We're like,
That doesn't surprise me at all, honestly.
we're like, really? Like his like weird office stuff. It was next level compared to what we were talking about.
Am so totally not surprised. I'll be honest. It just makes sense
Yeah,
that it would be Rockstar, especially.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But what I was getting at there is that like I haven't seen mass layoffs happen while I've been employed. I've only seen people leave of their own like accord. I think because going by my own experience, at a certain point, once you worked, I think it's like probably two years in the industry, you start getting like offers from recruiters from other places that can go pretty extensive. Like they'll be like, do you want to move to Abu Dhabi to work on our game? And you're like, not really, but thanks for offering. you know do
Hmm.
you want to come to the UK? Like that kind of stuff. So I feel like you got a fair number of offers. So it's not that terrible if you end up leaving to find another place, and it happens more often than you get laid off. At least so far in my experience. Obviously, I only have the limited, like the 5 years in the one place in the world, right? But that's being what I've experienced, and I feel like that's the thing with the trade union is that they need probably enough places locally to shop you around too, which isn't necessarily always true. Like it's becoming more true in more places. Like you said, Montreal, you're probably fine. There's like at least 3, 4, 5, 6 places I could think of, running major AAA productions. They probably need someone year round. But like in Toronto, maybe not. There's Ubisoft, there's
Yeah, that's the thing.
Sledgehammer.
Being East Coast, I remember when I was out of college and I didn't know what I was going to be, but I was looking to see if I could get into the games industry.
Right.
And I was looking on the East Coast, like there's maybe North Carolina has the closest thing in the Triangle area,
Yeah.
but it's still like just a small collection. And I think there's some in Boston area, but most companies on here are like either individual companies and there's not a lot of, around.
Right.
Well, I
They're
guess
on.
there's Bethesda as well, but again, you're talking these are companies that are very spread out
Yeah.
versus
It's
reading
like one
about.
company in one state, and they don't even live in a major city. They're off at like off the highway at some sort of old factory or something.
Yeah, so it's like it wouldn't be as viable an idea for like East Coast employees because you'd have to basically up and move to another state if you want to be able to
Right.
go between jobs. But
Yeah, but it could maybe work in like San Francisco or something where you have just an abundance of companies. I think. I'm trying to actually in my head figure out like how many companies I know are
that's the
around
thing. Like,
here.
I know there's tons in like California, but
Yeah,
I
Yeah, I
don't
think
know.
maybe LA would be more
you're
than
right. You're
for
right.
game development
Yeah,
specifically than because it is more entertainment than like software. If you think about the way that people think about games.
Yeah, and Val's in what Seattle, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's quite a few game devs in Seattle. Quite a few in Los Angeles. I don't know. The Bay Area, I think, is more like uh, tech companies than game companies. But I
are
Yeah,
some
I've
though.
never been in the industry, so I wouldn't know.
I was assuming Supergiant was in San Fran, but they may have just been there for GDC when I went to visit.
There's also a surprising number of companies in Texas. Like I know Retro Studios and
Yeah,
Gunfire
actually,
Games are, and I think so is Airship Syndicate.
I think
But
Arcane is
oh,
also there.
there was a Crytek company there. I don't know if they're there anymore though. They might have shut down.
Wasn't id there for a while?
That's right. It is or was Texas. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, but again, like Texas is huge. So
Yeah.
It's a big place.
don't
I think
know.
you.
They're all nearby.
Yeah. I mean, I think you still expect to move around a bit as a game dev, though. If you get lucky like me, you may not have to. Um, it's one of those things where it's like it's super convenient to not have to move until you get the one where you're like, oh, I'd love to work on that, but I would need to leave the country or go across the country. Like I know like Microsoft's in Vancouver, for instance, and if that was ever an offer, I need to move across from East Coast to West Coast, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
that's
Trying
one
to
of those
think
weird
of
things. Like, it makes sense to work in a studio when you're doing mocap and you're doing, swapping art and concept art, and you want to be there for
yeah,
meetings and, you know, trying to figure things out. But like, just from a coding perspective, it's very strange that a lot of the coding is also kind of wrapped into that.
yep. I think it's probably honestly more like security concerns or like weird stuff like that, or managerial concerns than like actually we can't do it. And which
Mm.
is why like when the pandemic happened, people actually tried work from home and they're like, oh, it's not terrible. It's like, yeah, there's the proof. You could have done this like so much earlier. We already had the tools for it. Just didn't want to do it until they were forced to.
Even that,
Also,
like I know
oh, sorry,
across a
go ahead.
lot of companies, they still want people to come back into all. Like my company is like I think most of the people I work with work remote because like my company is headquartered in like Illinois, so I'm quite a drive and So it's like another like the my superior is down in North Carolina, so he's several states away from me, and so it's like people are all over the place. But I know a lot of other companies, like the one my old man works for, the one my sister works for, they wanted to get people back in. But it all depends on what you
Yeah.
work on with the industry, and also how I think honestly how much you really work with teams. Maybe like I feel like from my experience in an office, I remember the biggest advantage was if you're banging your head up against a problem, I would get up, I would walk over to someone else's desk, and I would start discussing my problem. And that's all I needed to do to realize what the solution was.
Right.
Somehow, it's like you think you're thinking of everything, then as you're talking through it, it's like that magic solution suddenly pops up, and it's like, oh, never
Yeah.
mind. It's like, thanks for
It,
your help, and they didn't say anything.
you also get kind of like a baked-in routine, right? You work for a bit, you get lunch, you come back. While you're at lunch, you meet some colleagues, you talk about what you're working on, whatever. You know, um, a lot of those little like natural solutions can come up just while you're doing those things. On the other hand, you can also end up with those days where you come in, you don't talk to anybody. Um, you have some work that you do that you're kind of like, you noodle away at. You're like, all right, this isn't due anytime soon. I have plenty of time. Don't want to finish it all too early. Um, and you're just like bored for hours. And you're like, okay, time to clock out. Okay, goodbye.
Mm,
Like way too many days like that. But
certainly can happen.
uh,
Well,
yeah. The
the
other
coffee
thing,
stain studio guys joke about that, right? They what on making Satisfactory, some of the devlogs for Satisfactory, they make jokes
right?
about like coming to the office, he drinks like 8 cups of coffee or whatever, and then
And
like
leaves.
it's the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny too, because I mean, you also the other thing with work from home is you don't get those meetings that I hate where it's like a big department meeting. Okay, we're inviting everybody. You have to come, and they're like, yeah, show up. And you're sitting at a table that's like 50 people, and they're talking about something that's nothing to do with you, and you're in the corner, and you're like, it'd be rude to stand up and leave. But how long is this meeting again? Oh my God, it's like 50 minutes long, and they keep talking, and then it kind of goes back and forth, and you're like, and then at some point, just when you've maximum zoned out, they started doing some kind of like round table thing where they're like, so what's your perspective over there at the back? And you're like, what were you talking about again?
Right.
Like, just at the last moment when you think you're totally redundant, they pull you in for a useless opinion.
It was actually a quick time event all along.
Right, exactly.
You think you're watching a cutscene.
Real life
Yeah.
QuickTime events. Oh my goodness. See, fortunately, I haven't had meetings like that. Most of my meetings I really have, in my experience, have been like, why am I here again? Um, but now it's like a weird mixture. Now it is a weird mixture. Like, I don't know. Meetings are,
Well, when those happen with work
yeah.
from home, you are continuing to do your work while not listening, and then the result is the same when they ask you for your opinion. So, win-win. You continue to do your work.
That's one of the options. Yeah.
True, you could be doing no work as well, but you're still at least more satisfied by the end.
Because I've had meetings I've had to steer as well. But that talk about my current job gets a bit risky. So let's
Right.
let's get off the meetings topic.
What I was thinking was the other thing with the whole union is that like you can run into situations like I think this happens at the Screen Actors Guild. Like, don't quote me on it, but like I've heard it's why like amateur voice acting isn't really a thing in games anymore. Like if you play older games like Thief and the like, or even like I think Halo 1, you could probably find some where it's obviously the developers or at least like the director or something has done a voice just for fun. Um,
Hmm.
I
That's how
think
Joseph Staten was the grunt.
right. I think that's increasingly a problem when you hire Screen Actors Guild actors and things because everyone who does voice acting in the game has to be a voice actor. They don't want non-union people kind of getting mixed in there because everyone should be covered by the union. So unless you want to like unionize your programmer who's doing a funny voice, right? You just don't put it in, which means it's more expensive overall. But also, if you just wanted a quick filler voice for something, you can't really get it. That you need a proper voice actor to fill that role.
Yeah,
Basically
and you
means
need
the
a proper
closest-
script, and so you need a writer, and you need a union writer to write the script for the voice actor. And
Right.
suddenly, it's like the guy who's like, "Hey, it'd be funny to add this little Easter egg," turns into a 2-month production.
Yeah.
I think that Sorry, I was gonna just say that I think that's
Okay.
one of the things that was revealed some time ago when there were a lot of people looking at BAFTA award nominees and they were like, "Really? These are it?" And it's like, well, these are the ones that are part of like a writers guild.
Right.
Um, there's the games writers are part of a writers guild. Like other games, not so much. And that's actually one of the interesting things too, where it's like, okay, well, no Japanese game's going to get nominated for a writers thing then
Right.
because most of them aren't part of any kind of a writers guild, right?
Right. And
So
and
it
same thing
is.
if you have like a double A studio or something that just doesn't have those types of connections, that doesn't want to get into like a full industry, you know, bring in the Writers Guild to do our narrative type thing. They just have like a guy, right?
Mm.
That's also the funny thing too, because then you have like Hellblade, right?
Right.
Where originally, oh, I can't remember her name. It was a one of those European names that is so weird to an American tongue. Um, oh gosh, I wish I could remember it. But like she like floored everybody because she was supposed to be a stand-in. Like we're gonna have her temporarily, fill in as the character while we have all these character designs. Then eventually they're like, you know what? She does such a good job. She is the character.
Right.
And now like watching like the original, well, the Hellblade Senua Saga trailer where they've got this intense facial capture of her, and it's like, dang man. But that's the thing. She wouldn't have been Guild,
Right.
and she was just this crazy discovery.
Mm.
You know.
Although you can get the same thing with a guild, right? Like Harrison Ford in Star Wars is a famous example, right? He was in a union, but he wasn't an actor. He was a some sort of lighting tech or something.
Right.
But he was in American Graffiti.
I mean, I feel like it could definitely get complicated if everything was a guild that same way, because, let's say I was to do some advanced scripting or something, or for God forbid, open up a code editor to change something, you know, like as a mere scripter level designer, right? Like, is that outside my purview? Do you need am I doing work that a programmer from a guild should be doing, sort of thing? Now, to be fair, they could all be under the same umbrella. It might not be a problem, but that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking might cause issues if you're trying to unionize at like every level, right?
Mm.
Interesting. Well, that's the thing. I wasn't sure about like a specific union per position, but like generally that though, because that's what you mostly hear about, or at least what I've mostly read about is a lot of times a game's about to ship, but then they'll lay a bunch of people off. People are like, "Yo, man, what's the big deal?" And it's like they don't have any work for those guys.
Yeah,
It's like their
they
job is
usually
done.
like big enough studios try to have a game to follow up, and when they don't, it's bad because yeah, they have a bunch of people that have no work to do. Like, what's a level designer going to do when you're like passing around design documents for like how the game's like going to function at a basic level, right? You haven't even decided if it's going to be an RTS or an FPS or what it is, and then you've got like a staff of 30 level designers who only get to work when the level design tools are built and they have a game build to play them on to actually see how it plays, right? They can
Yeah, like
sure they can work on. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, how many level designers do you need for a gray box that's just testing and prototyping mechanics out?
Right, and not only that, but before that point, like the engine's got to be there, and it's like they can work on designs for things, but they can't design a level without being able to play it. Really, like you can have it on paper. This would be cool. Here's some ideas. A design document for a level, an LDD they call it, usually, and that's done. But that's like a couple weeks, and you're just still going to have all that time at the beginning of production where it's like, well, we need a game to make levels for.
Yeah,
So
because
I,
let's say
yeah,
your design documents built around this like mechanic, and then you go and you build it and you prototype and play test it, and it's like, oh wait, this mechanic is garbage.
right,
We got to completely rethink this. Well, good thing
yeah.
it would be a bad thing if you designed levels around that mechanic, right?
Right, and it can also just be like you can find plenty of games that have these sort of things baked in. I was just one of the ones I played more recently. Super weird at their choice, but I was Oni, the Bungie game,
hmm.
and it's got these levels that were like pretty detailed. They covered a whole bunch of stuff, and outside of what you would normally consider the playable space is like power-ups. You're running around a tower and you look up and you see at the top of the tower on a ledge like a power-up, and you're like, how would I ever get up there? And it's like, I'm not even sure it's possible, but they may have taken the stairs out before that to like meet a memory budget, you know?
Oh
And you're
wow.
looking at it, you're like, the game has changed so much from what it used to be that there's like artifacts of how it used to work kind of scattered around that you can be like, wait a minute, you know?
Mhm.
Once
Even
upon a
thinking
time, you could
of-
get over there.
I'm even thinking of a more recent game like Gotham Knights, where it's like everyone looks at it and it's like, this feels like it was supposed to be like live service loot box, all this other stuff, and they just kind of backtracked some of those ideas. And then
Right.
people are freaking out about the Suicide Squad screenshots, and one of the developers saying, no, it's not live service. And it's like, was it supposed to be? And then they backtracked, though.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of
Which-
things like that.
That's actually one of those interesting things that also was on my mind. Like when you mentioned loot boxes, but I'm more thinking live service, where EA is like pulling a bit. I don't know if they really did live service per se. I guess you could count like FIFA and some of that stuff, but they were definitely trying loot box and everything. And now because they have to deal with the laws in Europe, they have to dial that back. Like if you
Right.
read what people have discussed about the Skate closed beta, it's got loot boxes, but they're like, what items are in that box you're about to open up. You just need to know what it's like. Each one has a different chance of what's in there, but you know what you're going to get, so you don't waste time or in-game currency. It
Right.
makes it less gambling, kind of a thing.
Oh, so it's like a like you pay money to open the box, but you get to see inside it.
You get to see what you could be getting.
Oh, okay. It's not even that generous. Okay.
And again, I don't know the specifics. I just remember reading about it because it's like, okay, they're trying to be less predatory about it so they can get away with releasing
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
But it's
Sure.
like that's one game that's going to be free to play versus they have Dead Space Remake just came out, single player, no loot boxes, no microtransaction gimmies. Just I think like if you get like the digital deluxe, you get cosmetic armor.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's a trend in the industry right now, where it's like, things aren't going so great. What do people like? Okay, these games. Let's just like make a bunch of those and make people like us a little bit more, and just play it super safe. And then later down the line, we have our plans.
Earmark that because that's something I was actually talking about with some friends the other day. But I want to finish because I was thinking about that. But then you also have because this thing again, like EA is starting to move. Like again, they got Dead Space, they got Star Wars Jedi Survivor coming out, was just delayed to April, which is probably good because April was less crowded than March, so far.
Right.
But then you have they had another single player game coming out. I can't remember what it was. But it's like EA is and then of course they have Dragon Age 4 is supposed to be coming out sometime, hopefully soon. But it's like they're suddenly building all these single player games and not like the multiplayer focused loot box. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
have you guys actually learned your lesson? And of course, it's EA, so even if they
Right.
did, it's only going to last so long. But then you have Ubisoft is in a really interesting area of uncertainty where they just canceled a bunch of games because they've been chasing some of this trend and it's not working out for them, so they're trying to now
Yeah, that's kind of where I was coming
regroup.
from. Because I was thinking like, so we have Splinter Cell, right? We have like an Assassin's Creed that looks like the original Assassin's Creed, and neither of those look like they're like a radical departure, or even like they look like the older games rather than the newer ones.
They haven't actually shown any of the new Splinter Cell, right? I don't even know if it's like
No,
fully confirmed.
It's been announced. I shouldn't say anything about
Okay.
it. It has been, but it's been announced. I can say that
Good,
much.
good. Saved it. I wanted to, before we get too far off the topic, off the topic of games that were changed so much from what they seemed to be originally and have unnecessary loot box mechanics and maybe shouldn't have been released, but were released just out of pure inertia. Shamus
bring
wrote a
up
number of
Anthem?
articles on Anthem, and I don't know if we want to go there, but
That was the
I started
BioWare.
playing it.
Yeah.
I
Sorry,
started. Me and my friends tried to get. Oh my gosh, yeah, that is another digression. Because what I was about to go into was Sony now deciding they want 10 live service by 2025. But again, it's like EA is like past that. Ubisoft is like, okay, let's regroup, and then you have Sony's like, all right, we've done the single player thing. Let's make everything a multiplayer game, and it's like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, and not only that, you have Square Enix with all that IP.
Oh,
Oh, here you go. It'll get me my fix for my NFTs in the immediate future, like a drug addict. I don't understand why they sold them so cheap. Here you go, Embracer Group. Take all of our IP.
And then there's
Pennies on the dollar.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, Square Enix. The funny thing is too, because again, like there was a big Japanese gacha game that just ended service. Well, is ending service soon. They announced it today, and this is like a big Love Live game, which in Japan, South Korea, Asia in general, it's like that's a big thing. And over here in the West, it's like I hope you screenshot all your like SSR ranks because
Oh no,
they're gone once those servers go down. Like this is the thing. Like how many gacha games have now gone down? But for some reason, in the Japanese, South Korean, like in a lot of these markets, it's like they don't mind that. So who knows what like blockchain games are going to mean over there? Versus just the general bad reception it's already got, like the bad reputation it has in the West. So Square Enix is definitely the dude. Me and my friends talk so much about Square Enix because like I grew up, SquareSoft was the company, my favorite. Like
they had a good
7 years old, Final Fantasy 2, Super Nintendo. That's the game. That is why I am here talking about video games now. And now it's like, Square Enix, who even are you anymore?
See, I have a similar arc, except with Blizzard. Like for us, because we were PC gamers mostly growing up, it was always just like Blizzard Entertainment is like the company. And now it's like, they've got bought out and they're making all these mobile games and they're bastardizing all their core mechanics. And it's like, I don't know if I can be on board with this much longer.
I don't think anybody else survived as long, except maybe like, I want to say Epic. Yes, Epic Mega Games was a thing back then.
Even actually, then, you could look at them and be like, "Who are you even now?" Like,
right? Because like Westwood is gone, Shiny's gone. I'm trying to think of old like PC developers that were pretty well known.
Technically, Electronic Arts, they're pretty darn, and same with Activision,
still exist.
But
the zombified version of themselves.
Atari's the real zombie because it's been like bought and swapped and traded so many times. It's like
it lives.
So are you Atari? Are you Infogrames? Like, what are you now?
It's like it's gonna be such a weird reference, but you ever heard of Gonzo Studio, the anime studio? They made Last Exile.
See, I was thinking, weren't they the ones that made the original Hellsing?
They might have been. They made a bunch of good anime. My point being, they've died like 15 times, and they've come back like 15 times. And every time I think Gonzo's dead, it's like, a new anime from Studio Gonzo. And I'm just like, who are you anymore?
Oh my goodness. No, but if you want to talk Anthem, that is a very fascinating story of a game without an identity. Caught between worlds.
Yeah.
Man.
Can we tie it back to the like the corporate not understanding creative endeavors kind of thing?
Oh, that's easy.
We can even tie it with Square Enix, man, because again, like Forspoken just came out, and this is a game that's like what. I haven't played it like myself. I haven't tried the demo yet. But it's like just looking at it, it's like whose idea what is the creative direction of this game?
Yeah.
Who was the director?
Right.
And even then, it's like if this started out as before Project Athia, they had like what is it like Ignis Witch or something like that. Like that they was this like a decade ago that they got Gary Whitta and Amy Hennig to build a setting, and then like years later, it's almost completely unrelated to what they created, and have these like not even television grade writers creating this awful dialogue and
Right.
That is another.
the
Why is video game writing so terrible? Another topic that Shamus loved to write about.
That's the one I have the most insight into, which is usually there were versions of it that made more sense that you didn't see, that then got pushed more and more into making no sense by like 4 or 5 different demands of like, okay, we need this mechanic in here at this point. Can't have it earlier? No. Okay. We have story beats in future game franchises that we want to keep secret, so don't go there. But you're like, but that's the most obvious place that it could go. Like, don't worry about it. Find another way. You know,
Oh,
we
no.
have
oh my goodness.
like, we have like plans for this place, but then we just realized we don't have enough of an art budget to build all 3 of these, so you need to pick 2. And you're like, oh, that's one of these is going to have to change location completely. So the conversation is like, pieces have to be cut out, but then it's like, wait, but we already recorded the dialogue. It comes down to a whole bunch of those little things, making it pretty hard to keep a consistent story until things are already done, but you can't bring it in late because it informs what's going on in the present. So you end up with one or the other, You get a story that is super abstract and doesn't actually seem like it's paying attention to what you're doing in the game, which came in late and isn't broken. Or
Right.
you have what feels like a bunch of pieces of story that all make sense in the moment that don't make any sense in the bigger picture because they were split up from like 4 or 5 different plans that got completely ruined in development.
Right. So you can go like
Rihanna-
the Breath of the Wild approach, where it's just like little sprinkles of dissociated
Atomized
story. Yeah.
Right.
Kind of
Rihanna
sprinkled
Pratchett
over the
actually-
top.
Rihanna Pratchett actually brought up a good point regarding Forspoken, defending it, because one of the big things that got a lot of criticism is like in the early part of the game before you get isekai'd, you have to go find your cat, but like the bag with all of her life savings is right there at her feet.
Right.
And instead of like taking it, she's like, "No, I can't do that. Like, I gotta find my cat." Meanwhile, the whole apartment's on fire, and it's
Right.
like, "Look, it's a backpack. You can sling it onto your back while you're leaving your room."
Yep.
Like, but it's like Rihanna Pratchett addressed like this isn't necessarily a writing issue. This is like a whole like
A production issue.
collision of departments issue. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
go production issue. And so it's like, honestly, it's probably more the fault of the designer at the time or whoever's in charge of like other things. But
It's designer going above and beyond to spot that and paying constant attention, because if you stop it at any point, it can sneak in, right? Or it's like that there is a review and testing process or something, or some director who pays attention to these things and goes, "Stop, fix it."
and that's the thing. Like, how many people in the QA process do you think are like, this doesn't make sense? And they were like, look, just have her give dialogue. She can't grab it yet.
Right.
It's like that's the solution, and it's like, ooh. But it is one of those things that, because sometimes you can spot that as well. Like God of War 2018, when that kid wakes up and is suddenly a complete jerk face that you just want to throw into a chasm, there's got to be stuff missing there. There's got to be stuff missing that they were like, look, we got to consolidate his character arc as best we can because we had to get rid of a whole chunk of game
Yep.
because we don't have time to ship. And yet the funny thing is God of War Ragnarok, where they're like, well, we could make 3 games, but we're going to make 2, so let's just squeeze 2 games worth of content into 1, and somehow the story feels more consistent.
Right.
That is magic. But the weird thing is, again, growing up playing a lot of Japanese games, it feels like a lot of Japanese games, not all of them, but a lot of them, the story feels complete.
Yeah.
Thematically complete, especially.
I got a decent idea of why that is, but go on.
I was wondering about that. So, because I was wondering if, like, if it's... Go ahead, share.
If you have one or, like, a small number of, like, lead creative voices in, like, a game development thing that actually look over all the content and unify it and go, I don't like that, change that. Like an actual film director, like a Kojima, there to have, like, a super anal vision and be a pain in the ass to everybody until they get what they want. That makes a game that feels like they made it, with support of other people's ideas kind of coming in. When you have a studio that's a whole bunch of managers stacked on top of each other with leads that report to directors, and you have 15 directors that have different parts of things, and like 1 to 3 creative leads that may not have the same idea, they don't have time to actually pay attention to all these things, that are managing the managers and, you know, weighing in on like little pieces all over the place that don't actually talk to the people making the content. It's very easy for us to fall through the cracks. And more importantly, whenever you get something that's like an original idea that stands out, it has to go through so many checks and balances on the way up. It might even get to the top and then get checks and balances from like the parent company for Western Game Dev. It could be like editorial sent somebody in to playtest the game and they went, I don't like that mechanic. And then because they're from the parent company, from editorial, it's like, oh, we have to change it, you know? So it gets through so many checks and balances that it gets sanded down to the safest possible version or removed completely if it stands out too much, which is why you end up with sort of like this disconnected, not sort of whole feeling like it's one person's idea, because it's not. It's like an amalgam of like multiple people's ideas that were then run through like a check system of like, do you like it? What would you change? With a little bit on the side of also QA coming in with requests that like, if you did, I say QA, but it's more like group testing, where it's like, you know, you have 10 people play the game. If 9 of them have no problem and the 10th finds like if they're confused by the opening, it's still taken as action point. The opening could be confusing. So, and then someone looks at it and goes, how could make it less confusing? And they put in like a tutorial dialogue or like have a character say something, which to 9 to 10 people is totally superfluous and feels weird, but it's to solve the problem that was put down because it came up in one test and one person wrote it down, and you can't just ignore the problem. I mean, you could, but to ignore it would be to contest the issue and to flag it and be like, no, not a problem, and then fight for it, which sometimes happens. But when it's like 50 people testing it, probably more than 50, it's more like probably 200 by the time the game ends, or whatever opinions coming in, you can't get test all of them, right? And there's so many things they talk about.
This is fascinating to me because it's like one of those discussions, right, where like there's like the two sides of auteur theory, usually both of them extreme. One is like complete hatred towards auteur theory.
Right.
The other is complete like worship of auteur theory, and it's like the reality is always somewhere in the middle. Like some of the biggest directors, like a lot of the biggest directors in history usually had guys they worked with regularly because
that like kept them in check. Yeah,
not even just kept them in check, but it's like they might work with the same lighting guy, director of photography, because it's like they work well together, like they jive.
Sure.
The director of photography understands the vision.
They could both push back when necessary, but they also spoke the same language so that the director didn't have to get too much into the details in order to express his vision.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I also think of the difference between Shigeru Miyamoto and wait, no, not Shigeru Miyamoto. Sorry, Hironobu Sakaguchi, and what I read about Tetsuya Nomura and Final Fantasy 15. Hironobu Sakaguchi, directing mostly the Super Nintendo, and then Final Fantasy. No, he didn't direct Final Fantasy 7. He produced it. Still had creative control in a lot of ways, but Yoshinori Kitase directed. Then he was heavily involved in Final Fantasy 9, not so much 8, my understanding is. But if you read about like development of Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, even though Sakaguchi was directing, it wasn't really like auteur. He was very much a, you guys here are all like what are your ideas? Give contributions, bring stuff in. And it was like a kind of manager where he did have the control of the vision, but he was taking in elements of his team and fueling them into the creative work.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the most, it's a quick read, but one of my favorite books to read is the boss fight books on Final Fantasy V by Chris Kohler. I think that's how you say his last name. Where it's a combination of interviews and development history of Final Fantasy V with Hironobu Sakaguchi and other members of the team, and then also his history in importing Final Fantasy V, creating a guide for it, learning to help translate it and provide scripts and everything, and just getting really involved in that back in the 90s before
Yeah,
the internet was as big as
I
it
mean, like
was.
thinking about it, like you probably what you want most of all is probably like as many people as possible, preferably everyone on the team, to feel like they can creatively contribute to the thing that they're working on. Like that's pretty important. But also, they need to understand well enough the game that they're working on, and what like kind of the director wants. And it gets harder the bigger the team gets. Is another thing that I didn't get into is that like if your team is enormous and it's distributed over multiple studios or even in the same studio in different departments and they don't talk to each other, which is how could they talk to each other all the time? There's too
Mm,
many of them. Um, it's easier for them to lose track of what they're working on. And usually the counter to that is like, okay, we'll make it more rigid. We'll tell them like exactly what they have to do. We'll more make it more prescribed. They'll go through more checks. And the problem with that is eventually they don't really have any creative input. They're just kind of doing the thing that you've already told them they have to do. You've given them exactly what they need to make and said make it, and
right.
their input is just putting it in, and they won't care about that at that point because like why
Yeah.
go above and beyond when they've already locked down all the outlets that you have to actually express any ideas.
Right. And I think that is very close to the heart of why uh, games produced by Japanese studios often feel so much more personally expressive, even though they are operating on a large scale with a large number of contributors. And it has to do with the culture of the culture of the United States and of Western countries is very individualist. It's very like you as an individual person, right? That's why we can have like a star director, someone who's an auteur who's like
Yeah,
guiding the project, and it's
Oh
their
yeah.
individual vision. But in Japan especially, their culture is very team oriented, and they have a not only oriented toward the group but also oriented toward like a cohesive culture. Like their whole culture is kind of built as a unit as opposed to built toward the individual. So
Collectivist. Yeah, that's
when you
generally the
get a
term.
team of Japanese artists and programmers together, they're already on the same page. You don't have to get them on the same page. They're already there,
yeah,
right? And so you can say, produce something from your own personal expression, and you're not going to get something too far off base because their own personal expression is kind of in this narrow channel already. And I feel like you can get, like you were saying, if you've got a group that works together for long enough in a kind of a Western culture context, you can get that same feel where they're all working together, they've all got the same vision, they have the same background, the same culture,
yeah.
like the team from
They've worked
id,
with games
right,
in the
where they were
past.
all working together, they're often roommating together, they had this shared vision, this kind of gestalt.
Yeah, and if you said, we're going to make a new game about this, and they would in their heads go, okay, we made these games. It's going to look like that, but with this new thing added,
Right,
and kind of already have that starting point.
right.
That's the funny thing. Having read Masters of Doom, and again bringing it back like halfway through Masters of Doom. I was reading that book, and Shamus Young had passed, and I was like, oh, I wanted to talk to him about this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
this
many
conversation,
things.
this whole conversation, man.
I
Mm,
know but that's the funny thing is like at some point they lost that same vision. Because what, and it's funny again reading that book. It's like it kind of opens up a lot in your mind when it comes to like John Carmack wanted to make worlds. That was his interest, and that's like, oh, so that's why he went into VR. Um, but that's the thing. Like you're right. It's like they ended up having different visions, and rather than kind of splitting the studio between like here's the guy driving the engine development, here's the guy driving the game development. Let's see what we can do. It kind of all collapsed, and well, I don't want to say collapsed because it is still around, obviously, but it is a shame and a tragedy in a lot of ways. But I also want to like make sure because there's plenty of examples of Japanese games where it didn't work so well.
Yeah,
Like
it's a bigger risk, I think, when you put the responsibility on fewer people to come up with something, because their vision might be like the next cool thing, but it might also be a crazy idea. Like I was thinking Dark Souls 2 of when they had a different director, I think it was, that wanted a game that was mostly artistic and didn't have that much combat in it. And they, at some point they decided, well, this isn't Dark Soulsy enough at all. Let's just change gears, and it led to Actually, that's a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier when I was saying you can look at this game and go, what did this used to be? Dark Souls 2 is a whole game of what did this used to be. You're climbing through what used to be like set piece dressing areas that weren't supposed to be navigated by characters, and you're like, what is this level? I'm climbing on a thing that's got like weird jutting ground pieces, and I'm like not able to run across them easily, and it looks weird, and the castle's really small on the inside, and you're like, oh, you didn't used to be able to get in here. It was just like around you in the background, but they made it a gameplay space.
That's
Wow.
interesting. I never knew about that.
Yeah, it was a
Huh.
lot of things in that were either just made for the E3 demo. What I like in Aldia's Keep, I call it Aldia's Hallway, Aldia's Porch, sorry, because it's literally just a porch and a hallway. It was like this is going to be a dungeon, and then the dungeon never got made, and it was just like the demo gameplay space from E3. It's an area, but it only goes as deep as the hallway, and end to end. It's just stuff like that where it's like so basically they had somebody come in and they were like, we got to like make a game out of this. Let's cut what we can and string it together and put gameplay where it is, which is also where I think that legendary go up an elevator from like a tower, go up an elevator, end up coming out of like from below in a volcano, in like a mountain area, like literally into the sky out of the ground.
Uh-huh.
And it's
Well,
like, okay,
it is like supposed to be limbo or something, right? So it doesn't have to make sense, but yeah,
yeah.
the theming is very odd.
But it's
A
especially
lot.
weird when in the first game, the whole point was that you could see every point that you'd go visit in the story from like every other point. Not every other point, but you'd be like, ah, I see a castle over there, and then at a certain point in the game, you'd be at that castle, and you could look back where you were and go, ah, there's the parish where I started. And in Dark Souls 2,
This
it's like, I've gone into the sky, I am now underground, and you're like, do I see anything I recognize? No.
this actually does kind of hit on something though, that because like we're talking about a game that kind of had a messy development, right?
Mhm.
And that's again like if we look back at Halo, like the original Halo had a messy development, like restarted multiple times, and I think the game we got was basically made in a year.
It does also
Um,
feel like it was meant to be more of a vehicle army sim than actually
well, it
a
started
shooter.
as an RTS, yeah.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
started as an RTS and became a first-person shooter for Mac, and then it got bought by Microsoft, and evidently, like what we get, like the end product was effectively slapped together in a year.
Right.
And evidently that's what happened with Halo 2 as well. After that E3 build where they first showed gameplay, it was like, oh, we can't actually ship this. We gotta start over. And so what do we get? We get a game made in a year again. Um, and yet, like I look at like I rewatched the documentary on Darksiders because again I
Like
do love those
sometimes
games.
it's not that common, but sometimes if it's close enough to being a game and you have the right people in the right places at the right time and that pressure of we have a year, go 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 go. If it doesn't work, throw it out of the plane. It might actually end up good.
Well, that's the thing because again, like I'm also thinking of the Darksiders documentary where the guy touched on something because they were talking about it's like the one guy was like, it's years later, and I still hear people talking about, oh God, I heard about that Darksiders crunch, and the guy's like, oh my God, like they became notorious for like one of the worst crunches to get a
Yeah,
game out the door. But the one guy mentioned like is like going to war, if it feels good because we won, but if the game
right.
didn't sell, we'd feel like we lost. But that's the thing. It's like
Well, like
this is one of those things that I
nothing kills that
find.
bureaucracy faster than a deadline, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those weird things that I actually. I feel like there's two different kinds of crunch, and again, like here's a controversial topic here, right? Because it's like
We're going back
there's
to the
two
uni
different.
one. Wait, go on, sorry.
Yeah, but it's like there's two different kinds of crunch, and like when you listen or watch the stories from like these guys in Bungie or were a part of Vigil Games that are discussing. The thing is, they were a smaller team, like less than 100 people, I'm pretty sure, that all. It's like what you said about the vision, right? Like they're all contributing in some way. They're all passionate about the project they're working on. And so they're devoting so much of their time, and yeah, they don't want to ever do it again. And in some ways, it is a young man's game kind of a thing, or a young woman's game, where you burn so much of the candle at this point in your life and at this point in your career. And I even think of other inspirational stories where it's like unrelated to the games industry, where people are like, we got to work around the clock, get this out there. And there's something to me that I find inspiring about that, but it's because it's driven by a passion.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's something that, again, it's like, if you want your team to have that passion, then it really does need to be something where, as we said, like everyone feels like they're contributing something. But if you don't have that, if you're just part of if you're the size of the Resident Evil 6 development team
Hmm.
and you got a crunch for this thing that like you're just not putting anything creative of yourself into, I can imagine that just being hell.
That's where you quit.
That's very
100%. That's where you're like, okay, I'm not even getting paid that much to do it. Because, like, video game developers don't make as much as developers in other areas because it's a fun thing to work on, basically, because they can afford to pay less. Uh, because people will fight to get that job, even if it pays less.
Absolutely, yeah. There's
They're going
competition
to make
for it,
more.
so it drives the price down.
Yeah, but if you're going to be working on a game you don't care about every day, why not just make tax software? You'll make way more money. You'll have way better hours. You'll have better benefits. Like, if you're not going to have any creative input anyway, right? Want to have no creative input in something you don't care about, and do whatever else you enjoy with that money and time, right?
And I guess this is where I gotta wonder, and I guess like some of it is like from my position as an enthusiast gamer, where a lot of my favorite games these days are by double A studios. Because that's the like
I think small
last
teams
year,
are like way, way, way more likely to make a great game. They're limited in scope to a degree, but not to that big a degree.
because that's the thing. Like one of my favorite games last year was by this independent Italian studio. I can't remember their name. I think they're just Reply Studios, called Solstice. Um, Mechanics are definitely inspired by Devil May Cry. Um, I I just recently watched the anime Claymore, and I was like, oh my goodness, they were really inspired by Claymore.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool.
but it's like it does so much things that are unique, and it's so polished. Like I'm sitting here, it's like this is a double A independent studio making a game that feels as good to play as Devil May Cry, and it costs $40.
Yeah, and the
Like,
reason I said that they're not limited that much is that, like, it's economies of scale work pretty hard against really big teams. Like, you end up spending a significant amount of your time and money just keeping the team organized and not actually producing anything. Like, you can double the size of your team, but you won't double your productivity. You might increase the productivity 30% or something like that. Might be a bit pessimistic, but like, you're not getting you have diminishing returns the bigger your team gets.
Right.
And other problems crop up too, you have to pay attention to. Whereas if you have a small team, they got to work hard and whatever, but like they're not as far off as you would expect when it comes to making AAA at a certain team size. If you have like 80 people, maybe they could like compete well against like a 200 person team or something like that.
well,
And
it's
it
like
also
look at
helps.
again.
You
Oh,
mentioned that it looks a lot like Claymore, and it helps if you are willing to make something that isn't completely 100% original from the ground up, right? If you've got a vision of like, oh, I want to make this look like a Studio Ghibli game, right? Like
Right.
there's a number of studios, indie guys who are just like, I want to make the Studio Ghibli looking game, and it's about a witch on a broom. It's like, well, okay, well, they made that movie, right? You've got all your reference
Yeah.
art already. You've got all the
Right.
themes. You've got all the plot points, even, right? Like you've got all the mechanics. You just watch the movie, and you're like, we just want to make that, but in a video game. It's like, wow, that solves so many of your problems. It focuses your team. You could just be like, we're losing focus. Everybody
Go
watch
look
the
at
movie
these.
again.
Yeah. It's also why remake games are so like easy, because it's just like, go play the original game. What do you think? And then you just have a little slide which is like, these are the things we don't like, we want to update, and these are the things we're keeping.
that was one of the things that I was again like to go back to what I earmarked. Are we suddenly seeing an era where we're going to be remaking or revisiting games from like 2000, early 2000 to 2010?
Certainly
Because
feels like it.
Modern Warfare was getting remade, and that still feels weird to me.
That does feel weird. They never stopped making Modern Warfare.
That's part of it, but also I don't know. For me, it's like, is this really an upgrade? Because making it more Hollywood cinematic doesn't add anything to it. But I don't know. But it's like we're remaking that. Like Dead Space just got remade, and again, like from what I played, my first thought was I want this to be the blueprint for if you remake BioShock, because
Right.
holy cow, like just the interconnectedness of the issue. Because I was recently replaying BioShock, and it frustrated me that it wasn't more Metroidvania in nature or Resident
Yeah.
Evil original in nature. Like,
I bet
oof.
they had a version that was. I don't like, don't quote me on it, but I strongly think they probably had a version that played more like a Looking Glass game, and then like somebody didn't like it, or Xbox tech limitations kept them from doing it, possibly. Like loading screens on those bulkheads probably prevent you having an open map, which is super frustrating because you can literally see every generation an immersive sim gets killed by this problem. Thief was the last casualty, where it's like, oh, we're moving into a new tech generation of console. The new ones are much better, but we have to support the old ones, which are now the oldest they'll ever be for video game development. Like past this game, they won't be supported by any other games. Now go make an immersive sim level at a like triple A level of realization and fit it in. Oh, we don't have enough memory budget because the Xbox only has 333 megs of RAM. What do we do? Make levels tiny. Your immersive sim is gone. It's a
Right.
hallway.
It has to
It's
run
a
on all the
room.
old hardware.
Yeah, it's a bunch of loading screens you have to run through to go between really tiny areas, and it's like,
Ah.
oh, here we go again.
That's for me. I'm always on the end of performance over visuals when it comes to all that stuff. But I'm again, it's like because I talk to people that really I don't like. I will eventually run into people that aren't as big and deep into video games as I am, and I'm like, wait, you mean you like that big AAA open world game? You're not sick of that? Like there are people that I'm like, oh wait, you play video games? Yeah, I play Skyrim, and I'm like, oh.
Having to describe the difference between an open world and like an immersive sim level kills me every time. Because I really don't like open world level design, and I really like immersive sim level design. And I can see how they're superficially pretty similar, right? Like, big open space, lots of options, got it. But like, there's a difference between infinite options and several points that you can approach from any direction, literally any of them, that are usually quite small. And I'm building a giant Quake level. How do you find your way around? Eh, landmarks.
No, I could definitely see that because I remember trying to talk with people, be like, look, why isn't Resident Evil considered a Metroidvania? And
Right.
it's like because it's a survival horror. But no, look back at the mansion and how the mansion is designed. You can't tell me it doesn't have a Metroidvania elements. But then
Right.
I remember also talking to someone that it was like everyone was talking past each other because I remember I was in high school too. I was like, because I was considering all the text descriptions and the items you find to solve the puzzles, and I'm like, man, Resident like I remember just being like, point and click adventures are kind of obsolete because you could just make a game like Resident Evil, and someone's
Right.
like, no, because you don't point and click in Resident Evil. It's like, well,
Uh,
yes, but every other core thing you do in a point and click is still replicated in Resident Evil.
right. Is it
And
Yeah.
it's like,
defined by
no,
the
but you're not.
UI? Is it defined by the setting and like the feeling of the atmosphere? Is it defined by the mechanics?
Is it defined by the inanity of the puzzles? I think it was. I,
But that's the thing. Actually, what you say, even there, it's like, yeah, it's like you could take the point and click adventure and either take it in the direction of something like the Resident Evil, where it's more streamlined for broader audiences, or the immersive sim, because the immersive sim has some of that elements to it. At least I imagine it does. I never
So
really played many.
so let's drill down on that for a second because I think the distinction between immersive sim and open world is really interesting. And it seems to me, give me some feedback here, but it seems to me that the open world uses a small set of mechanics that you can apply over a large spatial area, whereas a immersive sim uses a large number of mechanics that you apply over a small spatial area. Does that jive?
Yeah, like relatively small. I think the thing about immersive sims is generally they'll give you a bunch of ways to solve a problem that can, and they won't say use all of them to solve the problem, or they won't say, any one of them works. It'll usually be a case by case basis of like, I'm approaching a situation and I have 2 or 3 choices that all feel like, in sort of built for the setting. So it's like, you want to break into a bank, you have the coming in from the roof doing a Mission Impossible, you have a tunneling in from below with the through the sewer, and then you have a I'm crazy and I'm going to go in the front door as your options, right? Whereas an open world game would be like, here is the bank, it's the bank building, it just is a single inner area and a door and a bunch of enemies surrounding it, and you get here however you want. You can drive up, you can fly in, you could paraglide, you can teleport, you can use your stealth system to run past the enemies, but it's all like fairly shallow in that, like, once you do that, you're in the bank, you've reached the bank, you do the thing, you fight maybe a boss or whatever, you leave, right? It's not a level that is the bank, it's simply a point on the open world map, because the map is most of the game space. It's like, it almost feels like in an open world every area has to be a certain size or smaller, and it has to be they called it 360 when I was working on Watch Dogs, but it has to be like enterable from any area, because it feels weird that if you come in to
from any
like
direction,
a location, like a castle, yeah, because if you come into like a castle and there's one front gate and you're coming from behind, you go, oh, I have to run around the entire castle to get in, which is, it's kind of a problem, especially a problem when it's a city block and you've got one door into a location. But it also means that your location can only be so complicated because it needs 4 doors on every compass point or more, right? Which means that you're not getting that same idea of like a designed experience where someone looked at it and went, here's like the 3 or 4 things you're going to have to do that'll feel real cool getting into this place,
So that's the funny thing. Like, I don't actually have a lot of, again, console gamer, not a lot of experience. I started System Shock 2 on Steam, and when I looked to the controls and how many buttons there were, I was like, nah.
That was the era of everything has a button. What do you mean?
Nah. It's like, to that extent, I feel like controllers did designers a favor. It's like, no, you need to scale down.
The Xbox controller was huge.
Okay, not that. Okay, that needed scaling down too. The Duke.
Oh no, it literally was huge. But what I mean is, when that came out, games suddenly standardized their button layouts on everything, including the PC.
But with I did play a little bit of Prey, 2017, when Shamus was going to do his series, but it's unfortunate because I am one of those that I'm like, I know the combat's not the point, but I really hate how this game feels. I really do. But to your point, there was an area where I used the glue gun, and I was just messing around. I was like, I wonder if I can get up there with a glue gun. Oh, I can. Oh, there's my objective. This is a completely viable option for getting around this barricade.
Right.
So it's to that point where just messing around, I found a way to solve a problem.
Right, and that's the thing I love about like immersive sim design is like, if you look at like Deus Ex, if you look at Dishonored, especially Dishonored, it's like these aren't all things that you do completely naturally with only gameplay ingredient like tools, right? It's not entirely that I have a super jump so I jump over the wall. It's that like a designer looked at an approach to like an area and went, okay, I'm going to give you 3 ways in and they're all going to be cool. And then they made 3 unique feeling ways in. So one of them you're crawling through a dungeon, and one of them you're jumping across rooftops, and you're finding cool climb paths and stuff, and you end up doing like a Mission Impossible drop into the inside. And in another one you're like running through guards and fighting your way in, and they all feel good because they're 3 routes that have had time for someone to look at and design. Whereas in open world context, it's too open. It's all open space, and it's all like, again, areas tend to be small. They don't have to be, but they usually are very small. So it ends up just being a how do you get to the point in the middle type problem, right?
I see Paul posted the beginning of the Prey 2017 retrospective, because I was thinking about that too, where he talked about defining the immersive sim.
Yeah, he calls it the 451 genre.
Right.
Yeah, because I have seen people refer to certain games as immersive sim that go against, I know his definitions, but also even what to me I would consider an immersive sim. Um,
Yeah.
but that's the thing is, again, it's like another one of those genres that by being on the console, I wasn't really that exposed to. I know they released a Thief or two on the original Xbox. I just never got around to playing it, and I don't know if it's one of those like technically not the same game
Uh, it was
releases.
probably Deadly Shadows Thief 3, which was like a it was like Thief 1 and 2 were like the classics that are all they're praised for different reasons. You know, Thief 1's kind of rough. It's got like plenty of cool ideas in it, and it's got a big variety of locations, and it's got very like narrative focus. Thief 2 is like a level design focus. All like well, I'll say all. The majority of levels in it are bangers, but it's more constrained and more orderly. And then you have Thief 3, which is like we're bringing it to Xbox, and it's still like a pretty good game, but it's got like a lot of obvious flaws to it because it had to work on an Xbox, like OG Xbox with its like tiny amount of RAM. So the areas were small, and at the same time they tried to do an open world at the same time, which is crazy.
Oh
The
my
Shamus
goodness.
article posts the first title that he's got on his list of open world immersive sims, or immersive sims, is the Ultima Underworld from '92.
Right. I'd also say Vampire the Masquerade is probably like if not an immersive sim directly, I think it counts. I'm pretty sure it counts. But if it's close if it's not.
Hmm.
I don't know if anyone's played that game. That's a very like
If
it
not,
has
Watched a lot of analyses about it, but I've never gotten to play it myself.
it was kind of like an absolute mess on release, and it ended up being like a
Yeah,
KOTOR 2 scenario where it got fixed up later by fans.
lots of fan patches and everything. I mean, everything I watch about it makes it look like this big, like, I respect it just for like seeing everyone's analyses on it and seeing what the vision was and what they managed to accomplish.
Yeah,
Um,
I
that really
just
was a
I
shame.
like how it feels like a slice of that setting wherever you go, and you know it works for so many different ideas. Because it's like you
What
can. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, it's a complete, almost off topic, but it's like I wonder if you could capture like the feel of vampires like you could in the late '90s and very early aughts. Because like Blade, the movie
Right.
Blade, is like one of those perfect vampire movies, and it's like, can we really do that again?
It's a good
In
question.
it's
I don't know,
even
because
got
even
the low quality CGI. You could put that in a game today
I
in
know it's
engine.
amazing. It's like even Blade 2 and 3 couldn't replicate that, man. Like, and it's funny because I watched the whole trilogy for the first time last year as well. Like I've just gotten on a kick where it's like I'm not watching like new stuff much these days. I'm not really interested in a lot of new movies and television, but it's like I'll go back and watch old stuff and be like, man, Blade wasn't a good movie, but it was good. And it's like
Right.
this is I don't know. And I think actually I think that's the most fascinating thing about the games industry where it is right now because we can talk about the AAA. You don't see a lower budget indie scene working as well in film or television the way you do with AA and indie games and video games.
Yeah, probably the closest you get would be like because like in like the late 2000s video game scaling up where before everybody was like the biggest most corporate huge AAA teams, it was like some games got made that were top of the line with a smaller number of people, which is where you got these interesting ideas like you know your vampires, your like Interstate 76 or Mech Warrior or things like that where it was like it's a crazy idea but sure we'll try it with 40 people or what was the previous vampire game that was trying to be Neverwinter Nights? Games like that. Those
Oh,
those teams were small.
I think I actually know what you're talking about, but I don't remember it.
Vampire the Masquerade Redemption.
Ah, yes. No, I actually that's the thing. Like looking at, it's funny when I was a kid, I wasn't impressed with 3D because to me, like the PlayStation and even the N64, they looked ugly. I
They were
liked
very ugly.
sprites. I liked sprites. Everyone else was like, "Oh man, look at these 3D graphics," and I'm like, "Yeah, they look like crap. Give me my sprites." That's why I love Breath of Fire 3 was gorgeous. Final Fantasy Tactics was gorgeous. You know, I love that
Hmm.
style.
The PlayStation 1
Um,
wonky renderer.
yeah,
Stuff doesn't stay put. It just kind of wiggles.
but
Golden
then you had
Sun.
Oh,
oh yeah, that was where they took the where they started with Donkey Kong Country, and they did it a lot of N64 games where it's like you're going to take a 3D model and then like just make it a bitmap and throw it in the game.
oh yeah.
And
That was an era. That was a time.
it's an art style, and it's one that I wish would come back in some way. Like that's the next like because we got the HD 2D. Okay, great look, I love it, but let's bring back 3D models that are just spritified. Like
This is this is
There,
something that
there's a lot of
I've been
indie
working
guys
on.
who are actually experimenting with like pixel filters for rendering. So you basically have like a render shader that goes over the whole thing. So you've got your whole
Oh
game in
yeah.
3D, but then it does a shader and makes it into pixel art.
There was like a Duma like I think that had that look and it was really cool looking. Because it was like 3D models that had been like basically done post processing on so that they looked like they were sprites from the Doom era and it worked pretty well.
huh. No,
I
but that's
yeah.
sorry.
Sorry,
I
go on.
was just gonna keep on. That's the thing that like where you know when you get to the PS2 and the Xbox and the GameCube, you're starting to see a combination of greater refinement and still more experimentation in 3D. And so you know you start with Devil May Cry and it's like, oh, this is a really polished action game. Then you finish with Devil May Cry 3 on the PS2, and dude, like before Devil May Cry 5 came out, I was like, I've only played Devil May Cry 4 and DMC Devil May Cry. Let me start from the beginning and completely skip number 2 because
Yeah, I was about to say.
so I played the first one and I was like, that's not bad, but it's like, man, some of them boss fights, it feels a little jank in its own way. Devil May Cry 3, like everything about it felt modern to me. Like it wasn't the most updated graphics, but I'm like, dude, this game feels like modern polish. This game's incredible. This game's great.
Yeah,
Um,
it's got like responsive controls. It's got enough graphical fidelity that you could just sort of show whatever you wanted and have it
even
look
the
decent.
even the direction of the cutscenes. It's like
Yeah,
even cutscene direction. We like by the end of the
there.
PS2,
Yeah, there is
developers
cutscene
figured out.
direction.
Um, and that's just kind of what's startling to me. But then, and this is one of the things that I read a lot, and this is why I kind of get worried about like now we're pushing to 4K. A lot of people said with the next generation, we're suddenly like increasing the you're ditching the CRT television, you're going to flat screen, which means we now have a boost in resolution. And all of a sudden these higher res assets require greater pipeline, budgets become inflated and you end up needing more time, more team, and now you
It
know, and even Nintendo ran into that. Like after the Wii and Wii U, they're like, okay, actually no, it was from the Wii to Wii U. All right, we're going to be proper HD now, and holy crap, we had to delay so many games because we weren't ready for an HD pipeline.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of it's not even the texture resolution, or even like the amount of pixels on like an actual model. It's the expanding amount of tech you need to make that level of detail. And it gets to a point where making
to
spaces is
even
so
run it, right?
expensive. Yeah, to run it is bad on its own, but like that's a hardware problem that you can reasonably solve, usually by making areas smaller, which I hate. But like that's the immersive sim comment from earlier. But like the bigger problem is just to make that space costs more because you have to put more detail in and you need more humans to put that detail down. So what like if you look at like a Quake level, if you wanted to make like a an entire building interior, that was like a day's work. Maybe a couple extra days to put in like the individual little finicky props, but like it was a big chunky sofa made out of BSP blocks. Like who really cared? It looked like a sofa. You put a texture on it, done. Um, these days, it's like make a model. It's a high poly model. Bake it to a low poly model. Get the normal map working. Set up all the specularity on the materials. Get like a lighter to look at them to make sure they're configured correctly. Set like a million settings for how it responds to light and reflection, and you have like 16 maps to do to sort of figure out like even like how sharp the reflection is at a certain part, things like that. And
Mm.
when that's all done, you've got just the sofa or a
Right.
wall.
And then
you're
hand
like,
it
I
off to
need
the scripting team to make sure that it behaves properly as a game object with all of the physics
right.
settings.
And
Maybe you need to create some gibs for when someone throws against the wall and breaks it. So now you've got
yep.
like model the
That's
interior of
even
the
worse
sofa.
because you have to make all the pieces and you have to make the interiors of all the bits that break apart. You
Uh
also have
huh.
to put in the collision model, which used to be a thing because it used to just be, well, here we have all the blocks, but now you have a super complicated model. Your collision model is probably like an even lower poly model that's just like, what does it actually look like in physical space when it bounces around, right? Half-Life 2
Mm-hmm.
had that. Um,
I'm now thinking of everything you could chainsaw on the Gears of War games.
right. And all of that, it kind of stacks up exponentially to make it harder and harder to make like what used to be a very simple space to block out into something very difficult. And it means more people have to do it too, because like again, that was one level designer back in the 2000s, and now it's like, one level designer, at least one level artist, probably an object bank team making all the props. Level artist isn't even the guy that makes the art anymore. He's the guy that arranges the art and has things like concept artist before that. It's so big now that it involves a team to make what used to be made by one person plus
Right.
an expert that would come in once in a while and take a look and go, yeah, your lighting's all right, or touch
Oh,
it up a bit.
and you know what? And again, it's like once you put all that together, it's like okay, now run around and make sure nobody drops through the level just by interacting
Right.
with something at the wrong angle.
And
And
imagine you play it and you go, oh, this hallway is too short. It used to be, I'll just drag it in the editor, like 15 meters this way, and it'll be good. Now it's like, oh, it's too short. Let's just edit all of those things and get them approved again.
especially if you want to make it look realistic, yeah.
Right.
Rebake all the lighting.
Oh my goodness.
Well, and
I
this
can
this kind of
imagine.
ties beautifully into something that Shamus, another thing that Shamus was always interested in, which is procedural generation. Because if you can get your game world to generate all the props and all the levels and all of that stuff and script all the objects and things, then you don't have to spend all that extra time to make the hallway longer. It'll just generate a longer hallway for you, right? Like if you
Yeah.
can get that all to work. Now, the main thing, like you were saying, is a lot of this stuff has a lot of fiddly human tweaking in order to make it look realistic. But then that gets back to another thing that Shamus was hopeful for, was that ray tracing would solve a lot of these problems. So you don't have to worry about baking the low poly model and tweaking the materials. You can just have a generic material that's proc-gen and it gets
Yeah, yeah.
all the
And
lighting and all the ambient occlusion just by default,
we've
right?
kind of seen that with lighting too. So like back in the Half-Life days, there was a whole lighting pass that was all done, like pre-calculated before you actually started the game and baked into maps.
Mm-hmm.
It was super detailed. It took the longest in making a level. You'd hit compile and it would be like, time for lighting, and then it would just crunch for like an hour or two, and then give you your lighting. And hopefully you didn't have any leaks or gaps in the map or
Yeah.
anything where you go in and be like, oh, it's all dark. No, because you have to do the whole thing over again. But these days, dynamic lights, you plop them down, you give them all those crazy settings I mentioned before. How many candles is the light, whatever.
Hmm.
And it just does it, and it's kind of miraculous because you just have to place lights, and then in the editor you can move them around and go, yep, that looks good, that doesn't look good. It's to the point where you need to light your level to design it sometimes because you can't see what you're working on because the
Wow.
lighting is real time in the editor. Um, yeah, and I keep noticing cool stuff about that too.
That's some of the thing. See, I actually do find I have a real like I know it takes time, but it's like I have a real appreciation for modern lighting technology and how good the games industry has gotten at faking, how light's supposed to work. Because
Yeah,
again, the new Dead Space looks like how you remember the old Dead Space looking, and when you're seeing Dead Space 2008 next to Dead Space 2023 now, and the lighting is so good, and it's like, wow, the lighting in the original looks so bad now,
yeah,
but it
yeah. Well,
looked great back then.
right.
It looked nice and dark and moody, but now it's like, oh my gosh, the smoke effects, the lighting, the shadows, and everything. It's like
Yeah, like it wasn't all that
incredible.
long ago that just having colored lights in your video game was like a notable thing. That was like
So,
2002 or something.
I still remember the E3. I think it was E3. It might have been something else, but like the Source Engine demonstration, where it starts out like really close to G-Man, and then it's just the big empty room where they're showing like physics objects and how like the
Right.
the palette like falls apart piece by piece,
Yeah.
and like you can have the mattress float on the water realistically, and like all this tech stuff, and being like, holy cow, like this is incredible. And it's like
That was
now so much of it doesn't look as incredible as like what we're doing now, and yet we never noticed because it was such a leap then.
Yeah, it was so big. Like going from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2 is it's like a quantum leap in technology where like in Half-Life 1 they can't even have a train properly go around in a circle. Like it just kind of snaps at every every point on that track, like with the player on it
Yeah.
weirdly. And then in Half-Life 2 you start out on a train just smoothly going over some tracks, and everything else is physically simulated pretty well. You can like pick up cartons and kick them over and things like that, which is funny because I feel like they spent so much attention on that, and a lot of games don't even care about that today. They're just like, yeah, whatever. You step on
Well,
them, they flop.
it's like the invisible wall, because again, like that $40 game I played, oh, it's got a lot of invisible walls, a whole lot, where it's like you're a foot away from something, and it's like, nope, you're. It's like, yeah, it's a visible barrier, but we're not even letting you get close because we don't want to risk any kind of physics garbage. But it's like I could kind of in some ways better respect why they do that, because like, okay, you're a small team selling a game for 40
Yeah,
bucks.
yeah,
You only have so much time. So I'm not here to like explore the environment like that anyway. I'm here to like hack and slash. So let's
yeah.
get go. Let's go to the next arena. Let's get to the next arena.
One
And
of those sensible cuts for like what they're actually doing.
yeah, and I think that might be one of those things too that because I always wonder like what is again like what is the reception of the modern player, because things feel like they've changed so much in the last 20 years
I
so
hope
fast
I hope
in
we
regards
got
to
out of
expectations.
the previous era of if it doesn't look like a AAA Call of Duty game, I'm not going to play it. That was the worst era
Well, it
because every game
depends
had to be
too,
that.
because like my brother teaches some college courses. He's a professor in two different schools, and he asked like some of his students like, how often do you play games? And most of them don't. And it's something that makes me wonder. It's like, are we reaching a point where the largest demographic, real like, I know it's like they'll say it, but it's like the largest demographic is in like their 30s, kind of a thing,
Mhm.
and younger generations aren't really playing games that much. But then it
I f-
looks like
I feel like
the
there's more people playing games, but more people playing games casually and fewer playing hardcore.
Well, and
I could
maybe
see that.
college students aren't playing games so much as they used to.
Mhm.
That's a possibility as well. I mean, I remember even being in college, honestly, and a lot of people being like, "Yeah, I used to play games, but now I'm in college. I'm always doing socializing." And it's like,
Right.
Or
okay, I get it.
homework or things. Yeah, I know a lot of guys in college. When I was in school, which is 20 years ago now, I guess. Were saying, "Oh well, I used to play games and I still like them, but I don't have time for it right now. But I'm looking forward to when I get a job because then I'm gonna, work nine to
Right.
five, and then the evenings I can just hang out and do LAN parties all
Oh
night or whatever."
man,
The funny thing is, I stopped playing games nearly as much when I got a job, but I didn't stop watching anime.
Hmm.
the
I don't know
reverse.
what the difference is there,
I'm the
other than how
reverse.
much. Right.
I've actually like, yeah. I mean, actually, the thing that I do more, like, what I really regret is not reading as much.
Yeah.
Because I used to do like I used to read, I used to watch movies, I used to do. Now I occasionally watch movies. I occasionally watch an anime, but I'm video games all the time for the most part. It is I am a
The,
rare breed, but I'm also like firstly I part of it again is like I also don't work in the industry. I wonder if that does have something to do with it. Um
Yeah, you
but
can get burned out on something where it's like I'm doing this all day at work. I just want to relax and do something that's
yeah.
not related to my
I feel
profession.
like I feel like the games I do play tend to be more of things that I know I'll enjoy more. Like, not
Oh,
that
that's
I
definitely something that I do too, yeah.
yeah, it's not that I look at games and I go, I don't want to play those. It's like I have a bunch of games that go, yeah, that seems cool, but it seems like a lot to do. Whereas I'll gladly like pick up the next Elden Ring expansion when it comes out and play it day one, just because I know it's going to be great.
And that's my problem right now. It's like I'm trying to set up. It's like, okay, I'm only purchasing these games this year, and Fire Emblem Engage was not one of them.
Right.
I bought Fire Emblem Engage because I know I'm going to like it, and I do like it. I bought
Yeah.
Dead Space Remake. Why? Because I know I'm going to. Well, I didn't
Yeah.
know, but the reviews made it sound like I was going to like it.
Someone
and
asked
boy,
me, what if Fire Emblem Engage is bad? And I went, then I want to play it more so I can be angry at it and have fun.
oh my goodness.
It was the same way with Thief 2014. They're like, but Ross, it's bad. And I was like, if it's bad, I want to play it more than if it was mediocre. I want to see what they did.
It's like hate watching, hate playing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have that in me as much. I'd rather watch people on YouTube talk about it while I'm working, and I can vicariously experience the horribleness through them without actually having to suffer myself.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
interesting aspect because I know that I have experienced a lot more games by watching Let's Plays of them than I have actually sat
That's
down
true.
and played them myself.
I don't know. There's a certain magic to like something that's really bad that if you look at it and you can't help but wonder how you'd fix it. And a lot of those ideas, how you fix it, kind of directly become good ideas for your own work. I find.
I definitely get that. I mean, when me and my buddy Steve did a series, spread out, where we looked back at every prequel Star Wars movie. His intent to be, see, they're not as bad as everyone says, and my intent to be, what if I were a script doctor and had to go back and fix this movie?
Yeah.
Because
the ideas that you come up with, then it's not like the movie has them. They're your ideas, right? There's just a writing prompt. It's really good.
Well, it's also kind of just dreaming up what could have been.
Right.
Because it's like okay, I'm trying to figure out, like, because you don't want to add too many scenes, you don't want to change, like, you want to keep the structure. And part of this is, again, is funnily enough, getting this from Shamus in trying to rewrite things like Mass Effect scenes. It's like, let's not do anything that'll change the budget of it. Let's keep
You've
the
got
general
limitations.
structure, but like, let's fix the script a bit. And so I tried that approach. Easiest with Phantom Menace, oddly enough, because then as you went on, well, do we carry some of those changes over? Because sometimes that won't work for keeping the the structure. So it's like you kind of have to do it one at a time, and it's like an interesting creative challenge, but it's also a sort of, it's more than just, oh, I don't like that, or oh, I'm critiquing it. It is like, why does this not work, and therefore how can we improve it? How can we make it work? It is a creative mental exercise. It's also kind of practice.
It's like the Mass Effect 3 problem that I think that was like, how to describe it. Like, if you were the Mass Effect 3 writer and you had Mass Effect 2 to work with, how would you fix it? And it's such a complicated problem.
We're back to that's when you quit again.
Right. It's such a complicated problem. It's like, why did you do this to me? And the other thing is, I have to wonder, did anybody on the team go, why did I do this to me when they had to make a sequel?
Yeah, or was there enough churn that it wasn't their problem anymore?
It probably was that, but I have to wonder, were there some people that had their own bad decisions writing the second game come back to bite them in the third?
I have a feeling a lot of it was a gradually shifting writing team. Like, I don't know. Like, this is another thing that I watched a guy go through the entirety of the Mass Effect series in a retrospective, including the DLCs. And there were examples in the Citadel DLC for Mass Effect 3 where it's just supposed to be, a day with Shepard just chilling with people. And it shows, like, a good example of humor, and then, like, bad examples of attempted jokes that just land with a thud. And the good humor was guys like, what is it, Grunt, talking about, like, the window where it's like you got thrown out of it or something, like stuff that's executed well. It's like, that's good writing. But then you get the bad writing where it's this kind of humor that I started wondering, it's like, was this Citadel DLC done by the team that would later take over writing duties of Mass Effect Andromeda? Because it really felt that way.
That's what one of my favorite video game analysis pastimes is when you can actually tell that someone made a thing. So and I don't know if this is actually true, but I have a theory that, like, for instance, the Mass Effect 2 mission where you first encounter like Okir, like Grunt's mission, is the same guy that did was it Pharos in Mass Effect 1? Because there's so many similar things in the plot where it's like you're in a weird location. And both of them are. It's kind of badly explained what you're there to even do. You're just like, oh, I'm somewhere. Okay, I thought I was here to talk to a colony, but I'm on like a random like road, and it only makes sense if you actually read all the stuff in the background. But obviously, the level designer was aware of this, and you're like, all right, something weird's going on that involves people like talking, like not themselves. Something else is talking to me through people. It's like the clones or the people of the Thorian, right? And it's got the same kind of vibe. And you spend a while running around just being creeped out by these things, without even knowing the truth, and then you get it midway through the mission. And it's always kind of couched in like a sort of eldritch horror vibe rather than it being like a scientific thing.
Mm.
They're talking about the tank mother rather than, yes, I was programmed to do this. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I bet that's the same person. I don't know, but I think that's the same guy.
And it does seem like there's that eldritch horror vibe running through the whole of Mass Effect, right? That's one of the original kind of cornerstones of the series, right? It's like eldritch horror in space. It's kind of the feeling. But like, was that just one like key writer's fetish that he wanted to put in there,
Right.
and then everyone else is kind of like humoring him, or was it originally like part of the vision and it just kind of got pushed out as they were trying to market it, and like, so, well, this isn't doing well with the target audience and our focus group doesn't like it, and so it like slowly got phased out. Like,
One has a lot of space
what happened
cults too. Like, there's a lot of cults going on in Mass Effect 1 that kind of slowly don't get mentioned in 2 or 3.
right?
Just in favor of Cerberus, really, and that's
I really do think there's probably a director somewhere in there who was like, this stuff isn't relatable to me. It's not quite actiony Call of Duty-ish enough. Again, I'm not sure about this. This is just like a guess, but it feels like somebody went in and was like, it's not mainstream enough. Make it more like what I want. And you ended up with more classic shooter mechanics, which is maybe a good part. It was a little more relatable, and not quite as obtuse as like the RPG mechanics that some people like, for sure. But then you had other stuff like, well, what if like half the enemies were humans? And like, what if the Reapers were a thing you could shoot rather than like a thing you were afraid of that might someday get here and brain control us all? What if you just blew them up?
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of Shamus's themes that ran through a lot of his work was, why does everything have to be for the widest possible audience? Why can't we just have some nice things for these niche audiences? And Mass Effect was one of them, where he's like, look, we don't get many games where you're doing the Star Trek thing. Like, we've got tons of games where you're a space marine, shooting bugs. Why can't we just have this one nice thing? Why can't, why do the bros have to ruin it by turning it into some sort of space marine thing?
The unfortunate thing is, to quote a buddy of mine, because companies don't just want money, they want all the money. And that's what ends up coming down to most of the time.
I've seen content get sidelined that was interesting and kind of unique, and like the thing that stands out for the more mainstream spectacle, and it's like they thought it would do better. And then even when you look at the people, like the actual reception of that, people's favorite out of all the things was probably the weird thing, and not that many people actually liked the mainstream one because it's so similar to everything else.
I mean, specifically Mass Effect 2, how many big set piece moments are there, including the end, and yet people remember, I am the very model of a scientist Solarian, right?
A normal cutscene dialogue.
Yeah, actually with probably a heck of a lot of canned animation too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. See, I was wondering two things. It's like the art of the set piece and then the art of the villain. Because like growing up and obviously playing
villains.
Growing up playing like Final Fantasy games again and Squaresoft games in general, it's like set pieces ranged from like Final Fantasy VI was huge for it too. Like in the very beginning of Final Fantasy VI, after your exposition, which I do hate exposition openings, but like it at least feeds into, like, you got beautiful music in Final Fantasy VI, and it feeds into the introduction of the two Imperial troopers in Terra and the Magitech, and then you have just this quaint now, but it's like this
Well, look at like
moody march of them through the snow as the
yeah,
main theme plays. It's rolling credits, and it's nothing it's like it's subtlety, and then you have
well you
later
have
down the line, what's the big set piece? It's an opera, a stinking
when
opera in a video game.
you look at Final Fantasy 7 and 8 too, and they are like heavily sort of held up by like custom gameplay moments, right? Like so many mini games, so many like unique interactions with stuff. There's no like go to the console and hit E. I mean there is, but you know, where possible there isn't. When you go to the console in Final Fantasy 8 and you hit E, you're presented with the UI of the missile launch controls in a different language. And you're like, I just wanted to hit use, but okay,
Oh,
I
that's
guess I'll figure
awesome.
out. Yeah.
Was that in the PC port?
It wasn't the PC port because the PC
Is that
port was just the console controls again with your keyboard. Didn't have massive support.
That's
because the
interesting.
controller doesn't have an E key. Okay, I might be misremembering. I don't know.
Oh,
That's
it wasn't.
awesome.
It wasn't actually E. It was like press in blue.
Sure.
No, in
Yeah.
purple. Insert, and you're like, which key is insert? It's not the insert key. It's one of these keys.
Well,
They
that's
didn't have the best
hilarious.
localization. But yeah, moments like that, I felt like that's like my favorite part of the early Final Fantasies. Well, I say the early, like 7 and 8, the ones that I played before they stopped putting them on PC.
I wonder if that's harkening back to the idea of this immersive sim where you're dealing with these unique situations where you don't just have the same mechanics all the time, right? You've got like,
Yeah.
what mechanic even do I use to interact with this system? Like where you have to kind of pull out one layer instead of just like use gun on man for 3
Right.
hours or whatever.
Well, there were some really cool ones. Like I remember in Thief there was a bit where you could write in your map, and you didn't use it very much, but there was a level where you started and you're in a warehouse, and they had a system where like the warehouse doors were locked, but they weren't locked like with a lock. That you actually had to go to a security office and put in the code for the door, and it was on the door. So you looked at the door, and it was like, okay, this is like lot 012. And then you go to the office and you type in 012, and you'd hear the door open across the warehouse, and you run over to go grab the stuff inside. So I was running on my map, this slot is 012, this slot is whatever. And then I would be able to use that at the security station without having to run back and forth, which is, you know, a ton of effort for something that in a more like a modern game would just be hit use. But it was very immersive because that's like a cool security system that you might see in a real place.
Right.
And
Yeah,
this
it's like a
is
cell
this-
block or something, and
Yeah.
like the guards would just call on the radio, or not in Thief, but you know.
Right. There would literally be a guy in like waiting near the controls, and there'd be like 3 or 4 stations where you could put them in, and you'd have to knock the guy out to actually use it.
Yeah.
Also left thinking of a couple of things, because again, like you talk about Hideo Kojima, and I just found out, a friend of mine pointed out, in Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PS2, if you knock over a cup or something like that, like all the ice cubes, the individual ice cubes all not only melt, but melt at different rates.
No.
And it's like, this is a PS2 game, man. And all in service of one level that doesn't even show up. And that, again, like you want to talk about rain effects looking good. It's like Metal Gear Solid 2 still has better rain effects than a lot of modern games, and that was on the PS2. Like,
Yeah.
good gravy, man. Some of this stuff that was done. But I also think back to, again, like when we talk about, again, sequels and developers and the fan reception, like I was reading an interview regarding Ocarina of Time, and one of the developers made it so when you cut at the sign cuts based on how you slice it. So up and down cut will slice the sign in half, like that, like up and down wise. Sideways cut, horizontal cut.
Right.
So
Yeah.
sorry, I'm about to confuse the names again. Shigeru Miyamoto sees that and is like, now that is Legend of Zelda. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, from this point onward, to the fans, what will make a Legend of Zelda is going to be like the dungeons, the bosses, the tools, the formula.
Right.
And to Shigeru Miyamoto, what makes something Legend of Zelda is far more atmospheric and detail oriented than that.
Right.
And it's one of those things that's just interesting where it's like what is the essence of a game to the person making it versus what is the essence of the game to the person playing it. But
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a bunch of games I can think of that the formula kind of got defined almost by accident, and now they're afraid to change. It's like obviously Final Fantasy kind of didn't. It changes a lot. That's like the one thing that is almost constant, right? It's like a bunch of the world, a bunch of the characters and spell names and things like that. But for the majority of the gameplay and the world and everything else and the characters and the theme, everything changes every time.
I'm going to have at some point Rocketeer on this podcast, I hope. And I'm sure we'll revisit this and he'll have like a 3.5 hour long tirade about how you're wrong about that. But I'm not prepared to deliver that at the moment.
I was about to say, like, what I'm fascinated by with Final Fantasy, because I realized this when I was younger, is every one that we got in America felt closely related. It felt like a natural progression. Final Fantasy 1 to 4 to 6 to 7, the combat doesn't feel like it changes that much. Final Fantasy 4 feels like a natural, more dramatic progression of Final Fantasy 1. Final Fantasy 6 is a more natural progression of 4, but you have control over your party members, and we now introduce Magicite. And then Final Fantasy 7, natural progression of 6, fewer characters, but instead of Magicite, we have Materia. But what we missed was Final Fantasy 2, which was a radical departure. And then Final Fantasy 3, where we introduced the job classes, but the heroes didn't really have much personality at the time.
Yeah.
And then Final Fantasy 4 switched things up yet again. So you're right. It's like to like for me, Final Fantasy 8 felt really weird and was like, man, what are they doing? What is this junction system? It doesn't work.
Right.
Like it's totally broken. And it's like, wait, no, this is actually what Final Fantasy does. It's like it is experimentation. And the shame of it is the last time they did turn-based was Final Fantasy X, and I liked that system.
All right, we are over 3 hours now. So I want to segue back a little bit toward live service with like Final Fantasy, what is it, 15 that was a live service thing? And I know you wanted to talk about, Chris, you want to talk about like Sony going live service and stuff?
Yeah. What was I?
I'm wondering, do we want to put a bookmark in it because it's 10 o'clock for me out here in the East Coast. So we've been going a while.
Yeah.
I would not mind coming back, and maybe I could do a better job hunting down some of my own Shamus memories and things we could look back on and kickstart for conversations, because this was a good time.
Yeah, I had a good time. All right, so we want to talk about Sony going live service. We want to talk about game companies playing it safe in order to boost their PR image by doing things that everyone likes.
Yeah, and probably also because it doesn't cost them as much to make games that way.
Right, it's cheaper.
Yeah, it's like thinking
the formula's already developed.
Game. You're like, well, let's take a game we already have, use that as the game design doc for the game, and just update it. And it's because the game was linear and campaign based to begin with. We don't need to make a giant open world. We can just do this many missions. We're done.
Nice.
Doesn't work for every game, but like if you go back far enough, I think the trend I see with a lot of these remakes is that those games were smaller in scope. So they're an easy remake. Like Dead Space is, it's a linear single-player shooter. There's only so much Dead Space in Dead Space.
Yeah, they've still expanded it, but
yeah.
No, I get what you mean.
Right. It's not like they're making Genshin Impact Dead Space.
Oh god, that would be weird.
Yeah, I mean, I bet someone out there is looking at it thinking, what if I could gotcha Dead Space?
That's the thing I'm thinking of. It's like the gotcha is every time Isaac takes off the helmet, he's a completely different waifu.
Every time you stomp on a necromorph, and like what comes out is your gotcha reward. And then it's like
splash, splash. All of a sudden, Sugoi, or something like that. Like,
fund it.
And then you're back to the what is it? The problem with all the guns, right? You got
Yeah.
too many gotcha rewards.
Yeah. Get your loot out of it.
Driving your spaceship around, and it's just got like 1,000 fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror. You can't see out the front window screen anymore.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Well, one thing I wanted to do in this episode that we did last time that I thought was good was talk about Shamus. And what's the thing you kind of didn't like about Shamus? What if you had to nitpick Shamus? What's one nitpick you had with him? Let's do you first, Chris.
My goodness. Well, I guess the nitpick is going to be something that's okay.
This
That
is like
he
in the
didn't
job
go out to
interview where it's like, what's your
conventions more.
weakest quality, right? You gotta.
That he didn't go out to conventions more, so I couldn't see him more often. There you go.
He was too introverted.
Oh my goodness. So what was the other one? Like one.
Yeah, no, that was,
was-
yeah.
Oh, just
can't-
nitpicking something.
From
Yeah.
like a development perspective, I'm trying real hard because he was like the friendliest programmer I've ever worked with.
Last week
Maybe.
we said that he was too agreeable, like he was too eager to please people. He wouldn't like stand up for an idea or stand up for a thing that he really wanted because he was just like, well, we'll just give it to you and we'll do whatever you want.
He griped about it in private, though.
Maybe it was the like stuff like using OpenGL. Like those are harder paths to take, but they're more like your own, which I understand. But it's like the classic programmer paradigm of like you don't want to do everything yourself unless you actually do, which makes it. And if you do, it makes it harder on everybody else that tries to work with it because everything is custom. It's like so working on Good Robot as an example, it would be like. We have all these script files in there, but no editor really. And what they can do is limited because it's all hand programmed. It's like, well, yeah, it would be. This is the most practical way to do it if you're starting from scratch. But if it was like in Unity or something, it would have been done a lot faster. But it wouldn't have been all Shamus's. So I understand. It's just that like being so individualistic, wanting to like control every part of your engine, is sometimes a problem, right? Like it doesn't scale up that well. You can't use other things with it. It can go out of date like with OpenGL or have other problems.
Yeah, like unwilling to accept help from others, maybe.
Yeah, kind of. Or like when designing things, wanting to control it all, I guess. Yeah. Rather than taking like a pragmatic approach. But not that he wasn't pragmatic. He was super pragmatic.
Well, good. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me. This has been a blast, and I hope we'll be able to get together at some point in the future. But until then, Shamus's blog is still active, and his children are still updating it. They're currently still putting up the DM of the Rings remaster. They're releasing up-res versions of all the DM of the Rings, so you can go and take a look at that if you're interested. And there's still the whole back catalog, so any of this stuff, I posted a lot of the links to his articles in the live chat, and you're welcome to go and take a look at those and peruse through his stuff. He really did do an amazing variety of things, and it's kind of a polymath. And it's even more impressive that he really didn't have any formal education. He was almost entirely self-taught in all this stuff. So really cool guy.
Big part of why I started working in Unity as well. I was like, it's so cool that Shamus can do these things, and he's just working off what he's learned in previous engines. And I was like, I've got a little bit of stuff I learned making levels. I wonder if I could make a game. And that's kind of what got me to where I am now.